All right, so let's start off. As I began to travel, I first got into this, and I met this guy, Tony Buzan. I got the opportunity traveling with him several times. So I got to go to Harvard with him. I got to go to MIT when he was doing these worldwide broadcasts. And one of the things in my notes that I would take wherever I was going to see him was he would always be talking what he called brain principles. And so the first thing he started to talk about all the time is there were 7 brain principles that we all should be aware of in terms of what's constantly going on in our head. I'm not going to take you into these in detail right now, but this is going to be, by the time we get back to the end of our day, what I want to do is bounce these 7 principles against you and say, where have we learned something that can help you build on these 7 principles? Because this is what we all have as we go about experiencing our life on a day-to-day basis. So the first thing we keep talking, and the science just keeps coming back at this, is our brains need to be truth-seeking. Now, why does a brain need to be truth-seeking? This seems so obvious, but why must it have trust and be truth-seeking? It's a simple answer.
Because the world confronts it with something we call reality, and if it's not, then it's going to...
So we get confronted with reality, and as we sort reality out, our brain's got to have a filter that says, what should I be accepting? And to our own personal brains, truth-seeking keeps us alive. It keeps us from being conned. It keeps us from being in danger. So our brain has to have filters that say, what should I be accepting that's going to enhance my ability to live a best life? It seeks new information and knowledge. And this has been fascinating in the world of Alzheimer's research and some of the studies they've done, in that our brain is, and they talk about telomeres, which has been fascinating, because what they're saying, as long as we continue to learn, so one of the things I tell people as we get older, as long as we continue to learn, our dendritic spines and these telomere things that are at the end of these continue to elongate. And so our brain is constantly looking for new information and knowledge. So New Year's resolutions that we got coming up here in January, figure out something new that you're going to learn in your life that's going to help grow your dendritic spines and your telomeres. Let's go over to completeness. This is a fun one. We're going to work with this one a little bit later, but our brain craves completeness, and I'll play around with you a little bit on that a little bit later. But if we don't have a full story, we just make up stuff, boy. We will worry ourselves to death. It's a success-driven mechanism, and there's a simple riddle we're going to cover this afternoon. So if success is how we're driven, then how do you account for some of the bumps that we've got in our lives and the way we look at the world and relationships and countries and things of that sort? Mimics. We mimic copies and actions. So how do we learn from how we copy and observe behaviors? And I just read an article on, is our brain persistent? And where is it mimicking and copying from to learn behaviors that keep people and children being tenacious and persistent? And where do we learn that from? So we're going to come back to that one later today. And last but not least, and this is the one that just absolutely, when you begin to realize what's going on up in here, the sum of 1 plus 1 is a whole lot bigger than 2. And so I've taught my grandkids this from when they were early, and I always got to get, so what, when we're talking to 1 plus 1, and my granddaughter always used to say, Grandpa, are we talking about school or are we talking about our brain? And so she taught me to say, when we're talking about our brain, 1 plus 1 equals something a whole lot bigger, when we talk about the infinite capacity of what our thinking abilities are. So in our first module, we're going to talk about the potential of human thought. We're going to look at the process of communication, and we're going to answer that first branch. What is the synergy of 1 plus 1? I always remember reading this. When I first started taking this brain science, I wanted to find topics that I would be able to apply this research against. And I remember reading in Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Case Studies, and USA Today, communication problems are one of the biggest challenges in organizations. And so how we communicate from top to bottom, here's what we want you to do, here's what we want you to execute, here's what's going on, what we can't do, how people work together across departments, we call those silos. I started looking at department to department. So again, I started to see this, and this was like initially kind of unbelievable, but when I was working at IBM and they started to learn some of this stuff, I'd see our engineers that start with the design of a new computer chip not talk to the people who are going to manufacture it, and clearly not talk to the salespeople that are in the field. I always remember going to a car deal, having a car service on one of my cars, And I always remember the mechanic looking at me and saying, I wish these engineers that designed this motor would only come visit, because the part we're going to have to replace is going to cost you about $9. But the labor to get to it is going to run you about $500. I only wish they'd come and actually see what we go through to be able to do that. I started working then, I don't know, now it's a long time ago, over 12 years, in hospitals. And it always amazed me that when we start in a hospital, the importance of an ED experience, and that 80% of most hospitals get their patients from ED, how between ED, emergency department, ER, they're now calling it ED, thank you, emergency departments. What I was surprised to find out is what I call silos that existed between the emergency department and the inpatient departments, and how patients were going to get to their radiology, they're going to get to their blood test, and then put the doctors in the middle of this thing. I mean, communications like crazy that just didn't exist within the environment. And I said, gee, now we're talking about what? People's lives. Now, wouldn't you think that when you had people's lives, so I'm sorry to say, the more I've learned and what has to go on in hospitals, the more complex it gets and the more challenging it gets. And yet we consistently read, if any of you are old enough to read Art Magazine, we consistently read what about hospitals? How to stay out of them, because they kill you. And so I tell all of my hospital clients, I'll ask the leadership team, how many of you read Art Magazine? How many of you go to bingo halls? How many of you find out what the word on the street is about what's really going on in your community that builds your social networks? So we have communication problems all over the place, which then begged the question to me when I first started studying the human brain. So how do humans effectively communicate from one brain to another? So let me ask you to quickly work as a table. Come up with what you think the stages are on how people communicate. So how do we start a communication, and how do we finish it, and how do we know it's closed? So have a quick table conversation. This is your first brain exercise. How do people communicate? What's the process? We can start. So we're trying to figure out how two people actually communicate and what are the steps that need to happen. How does a CEO speak to an organization of people? How do you get up in front of a group of people and know that you're making some progress here? So let's talk about what this, can you open this for me? What's the first thing we need to be thinking about when we're communicating with somebody? I'm sorry? Okay. So who the audience is. Now, establishing a relationship may not, we might not need to immediately jump into that, though we might start by starting off the conversation with what? Well, there's an idea. I'm looking for something a little bit more crisp. Some of my folks were with me a week ago. You can give me an answer. I'm sorry? Well, you want. What's the purpose of my communication? What's my message? What do I want people to get? So the first thing I always say to people is the first thing you have to clearly define is what's the intention of what I'm trying to communicate. And so often we don't stop to think about that. It's like, okay, what's my purpose for getting up? So when I'm coaching with executives and I'm coaching with nurses and talking to patients, the first thing I'm asking them, so what's the purpose of your conversation? Is there an objective? Is there some end result? And I'm always after, is there an action I want you to take? And I love in organizations, they say, well, I have all kinds of communication problems. And the first thing I want to say to the organization is, okay, give me a communication problem you have and tell me where it's broken and why. So what's our intention of having a communication? Has to be the first thought, which then delivers what? How will I deliver it? Now I have an intention. How am I going to deliver it? Am I going to take a bat and hit somebody over the head because I really want them to get the message? Am I going to do it on a slide and I'm going to just bury them in a 20-page PowerPoint deck? Am I going to give them some exhibits? And how am I going to communicate? Which then gets you to start to think about then, so What am I going to use? What will I do to make sure that I communicate the messages and get this effectively translated so it begins to what?
Resonate.
It has to resonate. It has to start to connect. Now, I then start saying, okay, so I've started to output this communication. And so as that communication starts to go out, where did I go here? Oh, gave you the answer sheet early. So now we've created an output. The next thing I got to make sure is I've created this output. What? Has it been received? Did the people that I communicated to, did they get it? So was it received is my next. Now, how would I test to see if it's been received? And I see parents do this with kids all the time. I see them do it with their spouses. Okay, now I'm you're on the right page. Don't give up.
A good part of this is active listening
Yes?
and getting feedback.
Go ahead.
It's also this emotional component that's so important, and getting individuals who you're communicating with to buy into what you're trying to do.
All right, so we're going to introduce emotions into this. Now, again, years ago I started working, nobody in the business world wanted to talk emotions. It was like you just didn't talk about emotions. And yet today in a service world, when you're dealing with humans and people, it's all about emotions. Did you have a hand up?
I did.
Please.
You said, how do you get the person to receive your message and to hear it is to read it back. At hospitals, we do read back. At discharge, in order to make sure that the patient understands what the doctor wants, we do what is called teach back. And it gives the patient opportunity to then now relate back what the caregiver said, so when they go home, they know how to follow the instructions.
All right. Does anybody, I don't want to pick on you yet. This is perfect. We do a teach back, and I've repeated what was said to me. What do you think about that, to what Pat has said? You're able to repeat what I've said to you.
Is that your intention? Is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. I hear this all the time. I'm good. What do we have at that point in time? This is what I say, again, in a very loving, affectionate way. What I've created was a patient in this scenario who's a parrot. That's all they are. They're parrots. Politically correct says you better repeat what the boss says. At least that tells them what? You are listening to them. I watch this with spouses. I do some work with spouses occasionally and lots of times with kids. And I say, I live in Orlando, Florida, so there are times when I just hang out in one of the Disney parks, the Universal, and I just sit on benches and I watch families and I watch spouses. It is like a study in human behavior that I just can't find anything better. And how often do I hear a parent say, "Did you hear what I said to you?" And the kid says, "Yes, I did." Okay, tell me what it was. And the kid can repeat it. Kids are smart. They can parrot it back. But have we communicated? Remember, what action do I want to be a result of the communication? So this talking to people stuff is not easy. If you want to have what I call a closed structure of communication, because here's what happens, and I think some of you already started to touch this. As you're hearing the words, what's going on here? So now we've got the words, we've got parrots. What's going on here when we say we hold that information into our brain? You're evaluating for comprehension, and I think you said understanding. What does this mean to you? So now that I've communicated, am I generating any thinking?
Well, it sounds like we're still talking about sort of short-term memory, not necessarily your next thing, which is integrating it in a way that's going to lead me to do something.
If we don't get it to short term, we're not going long term. You're okay there?
Yeah.
Because if I haven't connected to thinking on the first part of it, what does it do? In and out. I see spouses do this all the time. They went in and out. So I got to stop it at least to connect to thinking. Judy.
I'm reflecting on something else. So what if somebody says something to you and you hear it, but
Okay, so we're going to get there on the integration stage here. So hang in there with me because we're touching it and it's really the close.
I think how you do it is you're assimilating it to your own knowledge base, trying to make a connection.
You're using your life experiences to create the comprehension. What does this mean to me?
I was just piggybacking right off what he was saying. You hold it in your brain to kind of compare it or to give it a value, right? And you decide what emotion is going to be a response to it. Like you compare something negative, you're going to have a negative response. If it's something positive, you have a positive response. So that 2 seconds or maybe split second, you hold it to decide your emotion.
And it's that, and you're going both, you're toggling between both.
Yeah, but
Is it making sense to me and what emotion is it hitting? You got to hit the two together to get the communication to close.
Well, I think there's even a more rudimentary problem, which is what you brought me up against, which is that it doesn't make any sense. You can understand what's being said. So often I deal with advertising, and so often you can test advertising just by asking people, is it clear what they're talking about? And guess what? Often it's not.
So I would like you all to go to JFK Airport today, and I would like you all to get on a plane and let us take it to 10,000 feet, and I'm going to ask you to jump out of it without a parachute. Who's going to the airport with me? Because it didn't make sense. So I see workers in this, I see this in all different industries. I see workers today being asked to do more with less. I don't know where the heck you go today without asking people to do more with less. And yet, if you're the worker and you're being asked to do more with less, what's your response to that initially? Grumble, grumble, grumble. This is nuts. Do they know what really goes on down here? And so it goes in one ear, out the other, and you hear people say, and I'll try. When I hear people use that word try, I know it ain't going to happen. Because try is their excuse for I'm going to try my best. And you know what? You folks up there that asked me to do this impossible thing just don't know have any clue of what the real world is about. What are they learning here in these baseball managers? We got to connect the folks sitting up there in the ivory tower. You know, Mark Cuban was talking about it. It was amazing, his interview. He said, I went to the Dallas Mavericks, I bought the team, and they wanted me to sit up in the executive box. What I've learned in business is I got to be on the floor with the workers. Because how do I know what's really going on? So I sat behind the players' bench. I wanted to hear what they were talking about during a timeout. I wanted to understand. In today's world, we call that rounding, or we go walk the talk and whatever, except if we're walking the talk and we haven't created the environment for people to trust to talk to you, what I've seen people do is run for the corners. I got one senior executive, you got to be smart sometimes to outfox the boss. I see an administrator, I'm walking down through the halls, and nobody's talking to him. And what I started realizing, the Spanish people, no English, no English. And so he goes to the next person. You talk to them later. I didn't want to tell him what was really going on. He comes back and hurts people. I mean, it's amazing what people will do. But the point is when you're asking somebody to do something, you got to come through what I call the cortex, and you've got to make sense out of it so that when I'm finished hearing the dialogue, I get through a gate that says, can I make sense out of this conversation? And what we use, and this was fascinating to me, this is one of these charts when I first started learning. This was up on my office wall. Man, I smacked that right on my office wall because I began to realize when I was talking to someone, this is what I was talking to for them to say, does this make sense? When I do rounding with patients, I do a lot of work with hospitals today, and I'll share that story later as to how I get into hospitals, but I've done a lot of work with corporations and JP Morgan Chase and the Homeland Security and what have you. But when I'm listening to people talk to me, or I'm listening for a conversation, I'm looking to see how many of the 14 modalities of human thought are we connecting to. Now, people look at this and we hear left brain and right brain. Well, I'm a left brain or I'm a right brain. No, you're a whole brain. And there are some patients or people or customers or service people, you know what? They want to have all the details. They want to know what the numbers are. They want to know what the logic to this is. Give me the analysis. Give me like 10 pages. And there are other people that just want what I call the gestalt. Give me the whole picture and just tell me when I get my product and when I get out of here. So when you're talking to humans, you're talking to the 14 modalities of human thought. And through our own nurturing, and somebody said it earlier, the experiences that we encounter, some of us tend to be more dominant. Give me more data and analysis and give me a book of facts. And some of us just want the big picture and just give me the net. So when you tend to be talking to higher ups in an organization, what do you need to be talking to? Here's the big picture and maybe some detail. In the past, you know, sometimes you're talking to people now. In my past, I was a finance guy. So what do you think I wanted to see a lot of? Give me a lot of numbers, give me a lot of detail, let me see how you got to that conclusion, and I'd leave out the big picture, which would only mean I left out half of my brain. Because if I couldn't make a connection to both, I didn't have a message that people would listen to.
Sorry, this is an aside, but out of curiosity, what do you think causes those preferences? Do you think it's because of your experiences as a finance person, or is there some genetic?
No, I'm going to just give you, my science has told me the nurturing, the life experiences where you've been encouraged. So you know, I went to school for finance. I was a finance guy. So what was I going to, I went and worked as a finance guy. And that's what I've done over the last 20 years, yeah. So because I've done some of these, just, you know, people say, do this brain instrument now. And I started off, I was like 70-30. And now I'm like about 50-50. Okay, what does it mean? It just means I'm using all of my brain. So when I'm listening to people talk to me back, I like to do this a lot with customer services, and when I'm listening to people complain about their service or whatever, I'm listening for how are they populating? Because that tells me how they populate, how I want to respond. So I always remember this, and again, I'm going to pick on hospitals a little bit. I always remember this man that I went to interview. The administrator gave me this patient that was the worst patient in the hospital. It's like, this guy is creating hell for us. And he's just a problem patient. And what he was doing was driving the nurses at the time crazy because he wanted a lot of detail. He wanted to know what his next plan of care was. He wanted to know all his metrics and his measures. So I got in to go and talk to him. So I told him my name. He said, oh, Paisan. Talk about building a relationship right away. Hey, Datino makes it not Paisan. My mom was Polish. My dad was Italian. But that's okay. I was a Paisan. So I said, hey. So first thing I said to him is, what are you doing here? Like, what are you doing here? Like, well, let me tell you, I got this, this, and that. Well, how did you wind up in this hospital? So I, first of all, wanted to build the space to have the conversation. How'd you wind up here? Well, I was brought here by an emergency vehicle. Is this your first time in the hospital? Yeah, this is the first time I've been here. Been in the hospital before. This is my first time here. So fast forward, we got to talking more and more. And as I'm listening to him, this guy is a whole brain guy. Now, what are the nurses talking to? A half. Now, the bad news is they're only talking to this half. What was his problem? And he nets it out for me. Real simple. The nurses think I'm stupid. I'm asking them questions, and they just tell me I won't understand the answers I'm going to give you, so I'm going to continue to treat you as a stupid patient. And what does he go on to tell me? He says, here's what they don't know. Every time they leave here and I write down some notes, I call up my 2 kids. They're both doctors. Duh! They're both doctors, and they tell me what to ask next. And he said, and I'm loving driving these nurses nuts because they're making me feel like I'm an idiot, and I'm going to show them they're the idiots. And I finally said to him, I said, but they're trying to care for you. He says, not by what I'm seeing and not by what my 2 kids are telling me. He said, so I'm trying to get out of here as fast as I can. How's that for a man that's being, I mean, he was like 65, 66 years old. It's amazing.
Going back to what you said earlier about learning something new and just learning in general, is this kind of the basis for like different learning styles? If you end up like a logistical person or an entrepreneur,
Yeah, you'll find Gardner's work starts to lay in against all of these.
it starts from here.
Yeah. He talks these 7 intelligences, and if you start to track those back, here, this is what I always use for my baseline, because this is what we got. So figure out how to build each of these skills, and you got it. So again, I'm not into all that kind of stuff, because I go back to what I call the ultimate root. Here it is. Master this. So what I did with this, I used it for communication. That's how we're talking to people. I used it for teamwork. So now why would I use this for teamwork? I used it for creativity. And I used it to teach leaders, this is what you better know about people you're putting together on a team if you want to get the most creative results. Because if you don't know this stuff, you're not going to maximize your outcomes. And I can go on and on, but I could go on this chart and talk about those 4 topics for another hour, but I'm going to keep you on communication. So let's just stay within the communication frame and say, here we are. And some of you have already touched the next piece of this. When we integrate, so we're hearing this message, and now we're making sense out of it, so we're making progress. We heard it, we're making sense out of it, and now the integration comes to, I go from here, and again, doctors, when I'm doing this with doctors, it's not there, but I use the heart. Now, why do I use the heart for the second part of the message? I think you said it. The emotional part. So I use the heart to talk about, has it connected to my heart? Am I buying into it, as Pat said earlier? Am I buying into what's being said to me? Because my emotions are going to be the fight or flight. And if I'm getting a message that I'm afraid of, and this is going to harm me, this can hurt me, this is going to cause me extra stress, this is going to cause me to flip over and do cartwheels, what do I then start to do with the message? It's a simple reaction. Well, I might reject it, but if I want to keep my job, yes, boss, and I go do something totally different. I'm going to survive. I'm going to hide in the corners, and I'll figure out how to survive the boss coming at me, and you know what I'll even do? I'll start taking the boss down. I see it all the time. I used to use the word, they're like terrorists in the corners. I don't use that word anymore in these sessions. Bad word to use in today's culture. But they're hiding in the corners, and they're now going to shoot at you because you've now given them a message that's causing them some level of fear. And I just read my 3rd article where I can't believe this, that people, and this again in the medical world, they get medical advice, be it your diets, be it your discharge instructions we're talking about. The people that are at the highest risk of dying are the ones they're finding are the least likely to follow the advice of their doctors. Is this not stupid or what? So one of the things that you've really got to assess if you really want to see an integration of a message is what? Has the person you talk to connected with your intention in terms of can they give you back some thinking? Have I got any thinking going on as a result of what I've told you? And number 2, what emotional resonance have I connected with? Is this something that you're interested in, that you can be excited about, that you can be enthused with? Or if I scared the ever-loving out of you and I put you in this level of stress and now you've just shut down the motors? And I got to learn this from the memory competition. I got to see mental athletes that come in and compete. When they go into the competition and they get in this stress mode, their neurons start to create pattern interrupts. They start creating interruptions of thought. And I'll share those experiences maybe at lunch with you, a couple of that stick in my mind. When the emotional brain starts to click, you start interrupting your thinking patterns. So just a couple of days, I was like, okay, where did I park the car? Okay, be cool. I didn't lock it before I parked it, so now I got to go find it. Now I could go panicky and go running up and down streams, or just say, okay, this is going to be hard, but I got to take 5. I did the same darn thing with a credit card. All right, I don't have my credit card in my wallet. Take 5. Now, who wants to take 5 when you can't find your credit card or your car? The immediate reaction is what? We ramp up the emotions and we start creating interrupts. So you're talking to a customer who's irate. They're unhappy with something that you've just done. Or you're talking to a person who's got a fear and their life just looks like it's ready to cave in on them. And you're trying to be logical to them? Where's that message going? Whew. So humans, dealing with humans, have to balance where are they at on the emotional scale and where are they at on the thinking scale if you're going to get what? The action of your intention. So you got to now follow, you're going to get an action from your intention. I saw a hand go up over here.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if step two, instead of kind of delivering people a message, is kind of assessing the audience. You're talking to your child, you're talking to a boss, you're talking to a coworker, you know, these are all, would determine all the other steps, many of the other steps.
So now we're going to get to the next. We're not done with communications, Judy. You just got me to the next slide. So we're in good shape here. Good thinking group here. Good thinking group here. I love it.
So adding to what she just said, at our table we were talking about body language, right? And so you're looking, if you have
There we go.
your audience and see what their reaction is, not only,
There you go.
you know,
We are in excellent shape here. We are in perfect shape to go to the next slide, but before I leave this one, I want to get back to our example over here. Follow how simple this could be or how difficult we make it. I have an intention of a discharge, so I'm going to pick on the one over here. We have an intention of discharge that by the way, I see this go on in all the hospitals I work with. There's not one I've worked with, and I've worked with many, where they don't mess this up. And it's so simple. It's sitting right in front of you. We have a discharge instruction with a patient. We're going to read them, and sometimes the problem is we read them 8 pages of discharge instructions, and they're like glazed over, unless they've been through memory training. Now, we're sending them out the door, but before we do, we want to test the communication. We want to test the communication. Have they really got it? What question could I ask them to test this against the close of my conversation? What are you going to do when you get home? Tell me the first, now again, in my science study, I want 3. Give me the first 3 things you're going to do when you get home and leave the hospital. Now, why do I do things in 3s? Because in the science I've read, and again, statisticians will tell you all the time, you got to look for things in 3s. To a brain, the first time we see something or hear one thing I'm going to do, it's like, okay, this is just the way it's going to be. It's just by dumb luck or an accident. The second time we see things or the second thing we're going to do, it begins to say it's absorbing and it's thinking. The third thing that we can explain and express to people, it's now sunk and it's there. They're going to do it. 1, 2, and 3. And in my memory work that Marshall and I have done, we find that most people chunk at about 5. So I got a patient leaving a hospital who's already emotional. They're going home. Who knows where their heads are at? And I'm only going to ask them, give me 3. You're done talking to anybody, your family, your kids. What was the next thing you're going to do as a result of this conversation? What are you going to act on? And that will then back you up and tell you whether or not you connected to their sense or you connected to their emotions. And if you haven't connected those two, you aren't going to likely get your action.
But it says logic makes you think, emotions make you act.
I didn't notice that. My
Yeah, I
goodness.
know. It's- a lot
This-
of what you're saying is up there.
We're in a real, and I haven't read that yet. You'd think I would do that. Pat.
Okay. I'd like you to go back to your story about your dialogue with the patient.
The man with the 2 daughters.
I'm sorry?
The man with the 2 doctors.
The man with the 2 doctors.
Yeah.
For sons, and who was, very upset with the nurses
Yes.
because he supposedly, you're thinking, that he was using both the left and the right brain. Okay? Now, you were asked to do this, to have this conversation by the administrator because this gentleman was
Patient.
patient.
Mhm.
Okay. What was your next step in who did you work with so that this kind of, interaction, which was basically negative,
Yeah.
wouldn't happen again? Did you talk with the nurses?
I went back to the A&M, assistant nurse manager. Went back to the nurse manager, and the first thing I said is, do you know who you've got in that room? So I at least let them know what he's doing.
Nurses aren't looking at individuals and where they're coming from. They're looking at holistically at a patient. That's how nurses are educated.
Yeah, but if you look,
Physicians are not. Nurses are. But you also brought in the point
Yes.
right? And there's also that whole emotional effect that you were just talking about with the, the discharge planner. And you mentioned it, the emotion that comes in.
Oh, big time.
The person is being now asked to do X, Y, and Z when they go at home. They could be in pain, they might have a social support system, they might not have anybody there listening with them. So it's not as black and white as I think what you're saying.
What's not black and white?
It is black and white. It is, it's what I'm saying is what you're saying here is appropriate, but what I'm saying is when you're in the real world, in those kinds of situations, it is, you need to look at it, and you're saying it to a certain degree,
Yeah.
and from a holistic perspective.
Oh, got it.
And holistic meaning looking at the environment, looking at the individuals who are trying to communicate and where they're coming from. And more importantly, the emotions.
I talk hotels. What I've seen in the hotel world. Are we giving people a product, or are we giving them a service? In the world of Disney, again, my son works for Disney, so I get to study a lot of Disney. When you go to the Magic Kingdom, or you go to Epcot, or you go to one of the Disney facilities, are you getting a product, or are you getting a service? You go to a hospital, are you getting a product or a service? Now, what Pat's talking about, as I comprehend what she's saying, is in the world that we live in today, if you're delivering a product, a room in a hotel, okay, the room better be clean, it better have running water, the beds ought to be clean, we don't have any bugs or whatever. But what are people's expectations today? Better be darn good experience to boot, which then brings you to the whole person. And unfortunately, finance people are terrible about this. Finance people are great at numbers, but they're also great at ticking people off, because it's all about the numbers. Because they look at just the numbers and not the people that drive the numbers. So what are we learning in our baseball world today? It's got to be about the people first. And what I've learned in my IBM experience is that it was always about the people. If I get people to trust and have confidence in me, I could create miracles. And for that, I got a chairman's award, and I got a president's award, and I got all kinds of wonderful recognition as a leader of an organization, and I got to go teach it across the world and things of that sort. But as Pat is saying, you got to start looking at this as the whole. And so you got to put people together. Now, how do you do that? When we're outputting, we're using our senses. We know what those 5 senses are. When we're inputting, we're using our senses. So here's the next thing you've been touching. How often do you, when you're talking to somebody, are you looking at their face? That's what you should be doing most of the time. But my grandkids drive me up the wall. Because when I go out to dinner with my grandkids, I'm going to pull the wrong thing out here. Now I'm going to be a panic. Where is my cell phone? But that's enough.
Take 5, yeah.
Take 5. With your credit card.
This is it. Yeah, with my credit card. This is what they're doing. Look at me. I'm shocked to find out my grandkids can't write cursive. Huh? When I see them sign, would you sign this? And I look at this, what is that? It's modern art is what it is, but I can't read their name. Well, in today's world, in the hotel world, you go in and check into a hotel. What are they doing? They're doing their pulling up where your room is. Are they talking to you at the first stage? Of course not. In the world of technology, what are we doing? We're looking at computer screens. We're capturing information as fast as we can from a person talking to us. So I find that we got a generational thing again. I'll pick on hospitals. I'm doing a lot of work recently in hospitals, and I'm helping work up a new one, so I'm really keeping active. But here's what I've learned, generational. In keeping with the new modern, in fact, there was a doctor who's just going to lose her license because she's refused to accept the technology. Are we out of our minds or what? Because what happens? a nurse comes into a patient's room and they got their laptop and their computer, they call them their computer stuff, and they're talking to the patient, and the patient is saying what? Now this is generational. If you're about, and I just started to do this study, if you're over 50 years old and somebody's working on their laptop and they're not looking at you eye to eye, they're not being respectful of me. So they're getting dinged on their patient experience on respect. And courtesy? What kind of courtesy is that? They haven't looked at me at all. This is a stupid laptop. If you're a millennial, that's okay. That's what we do. We don't look at people in their face anymore. So one of the skills I learned from one of my mental athletes in the memory competition is how do you look at least 8 of the characteristics of a person's face to tell you if they're telling you the truth or not. So I taught this to a group of nurses, right? So I'm thinking I'm doing this great thing, and I'm teaching these nurses that when you're talking to patients, here are 8 things you need to look for. And you're only going to look at their face because it'll give you the 8 cues as to whether you're getting a straight story. What do you think the nurses go back and do with that? The next thing I'm doing is nurse managers are coming after me in a director's meeting, and they're saying to me, what did you teach those nurses in your grassroots workshop? And I told them, and they said, well, all they've been doing now is telling us when we're lying to them. Shame on you for lying to your team. Sorry I taught them how to sort you out. But my intention was that they would use that when they're rounding and talking to their patients. Because what they were saying is, God, when I'm rounding on patients, they're telling us how wonderful we are. Then when we get our survey results back, we're getting killed. Duh. They're not telling you the truth. Go talk to them and study their face. So when I go around and I say I'm a fly on the wall and I watch them go, they're not looking at what we've been talking about here today. They're not looking at any body language. They're not, so the communication that's taking place is not real. I was not planning to do that today, but we can do that offline. I got to keep going. I got my whole brain. Now we're still communicating. So now we've got our senses engaged. We're looking at people. Now you're going to get to do an exercise. I need everybody to grab a piece of paper you have on the table. And you can draw a circle in this middle of this piece of paper. Because we're still learning the communication process. So we're not even done with all of this yet. And what I'm going to just do is have this room, this group, these 2 groups write the word trust in the middle. I'm going to have, and let me get that group over there with the word trust. So you guys work trust. These 3 tables, I want the word culture. There are lots of organizations trying to change their culture. Here's what I'd like you to do. For the next 60 seconds, and don't start yet, no cheating. Let me get my timer going here, because you only get 60 seconds to do this exercise. But all part of communication, by the way. Let me tell you what I would like you to do. All right, I would like each of you to think of the first 6 one-word thoughts that jump to your mind when you hear the word trust, when you hear the word culture. First 6 words starting right now, 60 seconds to do that exercise. Individually. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I should have made that my intention. Individually. Thank you. All right. You got 10 seconds to finish this up. And wherever you are is okay. We got the word culture, the word trust. 5 seconds, finish it up, and we're good. Now, I've used the word trust several times already this morning, and we talked about how important it is to have trust. And the thing I want to know is, in my use of key words, in my conversation with you, Are we all interpreting and coming to the same meaning? So the way I do this is I get somebody at each table to be my scorekeeper. So you'll be my scorekeeper. So you'll start by reading your first word and finding out how many people at your table have exact word matches. Because I want to see if the word trust is meaning the same to these three groups. So I start off a table at a time, and I ask you, how many words of your 6 do all 4 of you agree with? I need a scorekeeper at this table. All right? And you'll do the same. Each of your words, how many of the 5 people will be exactly the same, so we know our interpretations are consistent. And you only have 3. This should be a piece of cake for the 3 of you. What? You already did this? Hurry up, teams. Do this work. Culture. We're going to do the same. I need a scorekeeper. In fact, why don't I put you 2 guys together for this? Oh, you collaborate. Oh, so you cheated already. Okay. You got... No, okay, so let's try. I should have demonstrated this. So, how many people agreed with your word honesty? So you get a 4.
Oh, so it's however many people. And
Agree.
what about
So
one that only he has?
then he gets a 0. That means he's the only person thinking
So
the
it's
same.
however many people.
He's alone.
So truth, right? That was the other one.
Truth?
Yeah.
2?
2,
You go from 0 to 2 then. So it's at least half of.
4, and 2.
You go from 0 to 2, 3, and 4.
So we got 6. Yeah.
Well, you don't have 6. You have 1 word where 4 of you all matched,
Right, and then we have
and 1 word with 2, and the other 4 words you're out there.
Yeah. So that's
Now.
6, right?
No, it's 4 and 2. I'm just looking for exact word matches. So I have 1 word. No, it's 4.
Oh, you want
1 word with your exact word. Now, occasionally I arbitrarily pick the dysfunctional person at the team. So we need to go to another person and have you read your names and see if the other 3 are at least with you. The 2, excuse me. So read your words. Wow. You got a 0. So you didn't have that. Okay, so you're both dysfunctional to some degree. You're equally dysfunctional.
So do we all go? Do we all do it?
You can do it now if you want to quickly do it. All right. Let's. So you were our scorekeeper here. Did you have? Did they all match up with you?
We have 3 that matched.
Where 3 that? Let me make sure I got. You got 5 people at the table. Did you have any words where all 5 of you matched? The closest you got was 3? Yes, it does. And you'll see why in the next exercise. So you only had 3 people at the team. And then what about your other 5 words?
All the rest were there.
This is not a functioning team at this point then on the word trust.
You proved the point.
You did prove the point. Who's the who's dysfunctional at this table? Okay, what I was looking for is how many words do you have exact word matches on? This table over here had 1 word on the word trust, which was what, where all 4 of you agreed. Honesty. So did any of you agree with the word honesty over here? 3 of it. At least we're getting close. So trust and honesty. At least we got 8 people. Trust. Did any of you have honesty on trust? Honesty? No, not that going to work. And we'll see why in a minute. We're going to do exact word matches. So I'm sorry? It has to be exact. You're going to see why. Okay, we'll come back to that. So when we're talking about trust, what's process that for me? What are we talking about here? What are we learning from the exercise in communicating? I get up here and I say, I want this organization to have trust in their leadership team. And what have we just learned from that exercise? Everybody's got different definitions of what the word trust is meaning. And so now, if I want to deliver that, I want my organization to be trusting. The next thing they learned on these coaches on the football teams is what? When you're talking to your team, there needs to be time during the week of prep where you talk to each individual one by one. because I want you all to trust me. What does that demand? I need to know. I want all of you to trust me. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to her? What the heck does trust mean? Because the word trust, now let's see if the word culture, I don't know that I'm talking to any organization today that not looking to transform culture, do something with culture. And the first thing I want them to tell me is what? All right, let's find out. Culture. Did any of you, where you found? Zero. So imagine I'm talking to you about, you tell me you want to change culture, and I can't get a consistency of 3 executives sitting around a table. And you want me to do what with your culture? Well, I'm going to maybe hit her bullseye and miss your 2, or going to hit yours and forget those 2. Now let's see what happens with these 2 guys over here. Oh,
it's funny, we only came up with one word together, which was education.
Did any of you have education?
We had one match, which was values.
Not with all 3, just with 2.
Okay. So now let's take this out to the next level, because we're still learning about communication. My goodness, look at what's going on here with communication. And we talk about trust in an organization, and we wonder why people say, I don't trust my leader. It's because my leader's over here and I'm over here, and they've never tried to close together. Because what trust means to me is something that what trust means to the boss. We did work years ago with J.P. Morgan Chase, and they were trying to build trust and relationships in the banking. We got a group of executives in the room. They were all over the place. And yet that was a major marketing campaign they were putting out. So a few million people in New York City? Maybe not. Let's go to the next exercise. Take a word where the 4 of you matched. You had 3 matches. Use that word for this next exercise. You had none. Pick a favorite word out of all those. You had any matches?
No.
Pick a word out of the, whatever you got off your list. Pick it. Pick it. Values. Okay. Now, we play the game telephone with our brains. So the game telephone now goes to the next stage. I want you to take the word I just asked you to do, and I want you to put it on a piece of paper and put it in this circle. So now I want you to do is take this circle and ask yourself for the word you've put in it, what does this word make me think of next? What does this word make me think of next? What does this word make me think of next? And then for this exercise, you got 30 seconds to do this as an individual.
So it's not the same thing, it's just one, it sparks.
Next in the chain. 30 seconds starting right now. Go.
It's already written or new words?
What does the word I told you to put in the circle, what does that make you think of next? What does this word make you think of next? Five seconds, wherever you go is okay, as long as you hopefully you left the station at least. Now what I'd like each of you, first thing I'd like you to all do is look at the last word, wherever that is, the last word you've got, and see if you've come closer together in our initial meaning or have you gone further apart. So what it means is each person read your last word. Answer the question, did you get closer or further apart in your thinking? So each person read your last word. Now, as fast as you figure that out, everybody read how you got there. So everybody read down your links of how you got to where you went to.
Understanding, rational, reasonable, and reflection.
Okay, did we get further apart or closer together? We got further apart, closer together. I'm not sure if that's good or not. Closer. You got company in this. Let me give you at least what should normally happen in this exercise, and it's okay if it's not. The smarter you are, the more diverse you're going to be in your thinking. You know? I don't know what I got to say about the two of these groups here. Now, we're not. Now we've changed. They're not really closer, but that's okay. Now, we're okay. They did a fascinating study, and I don't remember who did the study, but they tried to fix a vocabulary in a study group that they were working on with 2,000 words. So they said, okay, you need to only use these 2,000 words, and that's all you can use. And they wanted to see if they would even be in this exercise closer together with just limiting them to 2,000 words. And even with just giving people 2,000 words, they found out they were still apart in communications and how they interpret key words. So what does that mean to you? If you're in the serving business and you're serving people and you're serving them beyond the product, what does it mean you have to be able to know if you're going to consistently deliver outstanding results? How your clients or customers or guests or patients are receiving your service in defining the key words that mark what an experience is. So when we talked earlier about respect, what do I got nurses and managers doing in the hospital world with the word respect? If they want to improve their experience scores, what do they have to do? To whom? This is where it gets hard. If you want to have consistently superior results. To each patient. How does each patient define how they want to be treated with respect? How does each patient define what they... Oh, I love the one responsiveness. This is on surveys. How does each patient define responsiveness? Oh, that is a winner. If you're from New York, it's like now. Let me tell you what we've learned. Again, these are incredible stories. And you do this by getting people to go talk to people. Responsiveness is broken up into, if you need to go to the bathroom, it's like 5 seconds. Now, if you're not within my room within 5 seconds, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to get out of bed and go because I ain't peeing in the bed. Now, you're a patient that may not be totally stable, so guess what you're going to get as the result of that on your core measures? I'm getting out of bed with a high probability I'm going to fall. Watch my fall rates go up because my responsiveness wasn't quick. Let me go beat on the staff and go beat the ever-loving out of them and get them boom, 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 boom. If I'm looking for a blanket and I'm cold, I can wait 2 or 3 minutes. Doesn't bother me. If I'm looking for a snack or a food, I can wait 5 minutes. Doesn't bother me. But just get here and let me know that you're going to take care of it. And when you come in and tell me you're going to take care of it, take care of it. All off the word. I love looking at surveys. I just love them in the sense of looking at them and just watching how it drives people nuts. Because what they'll tell you is working as hard as ever. Working hard. I did the same thing last. We just must have the wrong customers coming in this month. We just got a bunch of snowbirds that came to Florida and they're just all on a different expectation level. They're just more cranky from up there. We're people. And we have different definitions of the things we do. We have different ways of how our life experiences have interpreted it. And then we got this thing called the brain. And you've got to really get this because it explains everything you've just gone through. We have hundreds of billions of brain cells. Hundreds of billions. Each of them have 2 branches. We'll talk one that's what I call the sending branch and one is called the receiving branch. As they're going through that, they generate this thing called a synapse. And as these synapses are firing back and forth, we have these connector points on the receiving arm. So I always like to use, we're talking baseball today. I'm a pitcher and I'm a neuron. So I'm a neuron that decides on these things that create chemistry. So inside the nucleus of a neuron, we generate chemistry. That chemistry generates electricity. So we have scientists today studying the chemistry of human thought and the electricity of human thought, which is like, wow. So it's chemistry and electricity. So now you turn around with that chemistry, electricity, and I decide with that, I throw a ball out to my fielders, and I have 100,000 fielders that can catch the ball, which is the way they describe it as a brain's migration pathways. Now it goes out to a migration pathway, and it gets to one of my fielders, and when I look at the glove of my fielders, I see that it's got 2,000 mitts on a fielder's glove. And I have a few billion doing this, which takes you to the answer right here. So who's a good mathematician in the room that can answer that bottom question? How many thoughts and memories does a human brain have the capacity to create? A lot. A lot works. And that's what you need to know when you're dealing with people. Their thinking and their feelings can go to a whole lot of new places. And their experiences as they go about going through those can take them into what I either call and create their own miracles or create their own misery. And humans get the choice of which way they want to go, because we can think forever. We've got this unlimited capacity.
So, just to understand a little bit better, when you said trust doesn't match with believability, even if we have the same word trust, you can all receive that a little bit differently, right?
You
So
will.
Why does it have to be the exact same word?
For purposes of the exercise, because of the next link connection you did, because now so you got to put those two together. Now, I'm going to wrap this up to say, is this what went on here a good thing or a bad thing, or can it be both? So the question so the question then becomes, when is it a good thing to be able to have such diversity of thought? And when is it a bad thing? It's awesome for creativity to know that people have infinite expandability of the human brain. It's infinite what we can create. But we got to connect to the message if we're going to generate. If we don't connect to the message, we're not going to generate. We're going to flush it. But if we aren't lined up with our intention to the message, and we're all over the place in what we're being asked to do, good luck. Because the leadership team will carry that on their back and wear themselves out before the team will wear themselves out. So you get to pick it.
I think that's what happens a lot of times in what you said in the planning stages, especially if you're changing a culture, that a lot of times in senior leadership, they're not on one accord, and then I think they come to some type of consensus. So then when you get down to middle management, and they're trying to sell us to middle management, they don't completely buy into it.
There you go.
So then when you get down to service managers, the message, the original message is distorted. So when you get down to the front line, that's when you don't have the trust, because you didn't get the buy-in from the very beginning.
I love it. You just nailed it. There's a paper for you. Write a white paper on that. Figure out, okay. Because now what do you do with that? And I'm going to show you the work I've done around that has made a huge difference in outcomes. Get to one-on-one. Doesn't matter.
And my suggestion, my organization does job readiness training, so they prepare people for interviews. So immediately I'm thinking about the intention, action that's asked, like just asking a question. You know, tell me about yourself in that interview, and how quickly the neurons and things that go on in our clients' mindset, how they totally misinterpret that question. You know, they might start from, well, I'm from, you know, Harlem, New York, and I was raised over there, versus answering, tell me about yourself according to my job, the job you're applying for. So it really makes me think that sometimes I have what received. When you really think about like an interview, you have that interruption of emotion, right? You're nervous, you're sitting in front of someone asks you a simple question of tell me about yourself, and you're like, well, should I give it all? You know, where do I, where's the limits?
I would ask you, is the answer missing the target, or is the question?
See, that's the problem
You're
we have
asking,
sometimes.
it's a great question, but it's a
Yeah.
very open-ended question.
And that's the problem we have with our
If you want more
clients.
specific information, you need to ask more specific questions.
Yeah, we have that problem. We're trying to, in our training, we're trying to tailor what is that answer, right? Are they asking specifically about the job? Are they asking about the experience you have? Are they asking about you in general, like you said? And a lot of times our clients stumble over that simple question because they have such a reaction, as you said. Like, is it linear? Can I go there? What are they saying? What are they asking me when they're asking me about myself?
That's it.
Maybe it's okay to, I mean, I would say based on what you're saying, as someone being interviewed, is it out of the question for you to clarify? I mean, to say, hey, just so I get this right,
Yeah.
Exactly.
what part of, my background are you most interested in or would be most relevant?
You know, as,
Yeah.
as someone
All right.
long ago, I'm sorry to take this up, but as
Yeah.
someone long ago did interview training many,
Yeah.
many years ago, I would never let somebody ask that question because you might get the answer, well, I have this handicap and I had a lot of trouble getting to work, and you don't know what, plus it puts the person in a very defensive situation immediately. So I think it's probably too far.
Let me get the sequence. Pat is first, then we're going to come here, and then we'll wrap it up with Sandy.
I think you start from the end. You start from, the question that you're going to ask is, what is the purpose of that question? What do you actually want to find out? So it's the end product that you're looking at, which will direct the strategies or the questions to get to that end product, whatever that
Back to the tension, the objective, what action do you want to see take place? Go.
All of us have worked with hiring managers who don't have a, pardon the expression, a fucking clue why they're doing an interview and what they want to do. And that's where the problem starts. You've done your training.
Sure,
it was with
absolutely.
this reading. But still, when they went back and actually set up their interviews, they asked these stupid questions. And that's why job interviews have shown they have zero predictable validity. So have the interviews for college applications.
Boy, when we go to the module after lunch, we're going to come back to a job interview and what you get.
I would disagree with you.
All right, we're not going to take that offline. Hold on, we got to get to Sandy, and then we'll wrap this up with Judy.
I was just going to say, it's slightly cynical, but from the interviewee's point of view, the absolute sort of extreme of that is the politician who creates the answer that he wants to give.
Based
He
on
or
whatever,
she
yeah.
wants to
Yeah.
give.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I hate that. It drives me nuts. Yeah. You know, all right, offline conversation with politics. Judy, did you want to say something?
No, I just want to say, in that particular case, we can't control what the interviewer has asked participants. I guess the question is, how does the interviewee respond to, can't control the fact that he was just asked that crazy question, one that you don't think is appropriate. So what is the correct response? And I guess the interviewee has to go back to, okay, I want to communicate something. What is my intended response from this, right? So, what would you
But
suggest?
I would say, and I'm sorry to get
Go.
off the tangent, but I would say especially with your clients and they're dealing with someone in power, they're in fright. They're in fright. How do I respond to this? If I ask, what is it that you want to know? Gee, I'm responding with a question. What I should be thinking is, well, I want this job or I want this position. What can I say about that? But they've already been put in a very defensive position and they don't know how to respond.
You're exactly right.
All right. During our break, which we're going to have in a few minutes, if Marshall, you want to take any of these folks still into this, you guys can come to a huddle. This is an excellent dialogue, and what you're telling me is your heads are in the game, you're thinking, and you're taking the lesson and applying it. This is not easy to apply day to day. And so I have so many CEOs or administrators or senior executives that say, I got to that and I listened to that brain-to-brain thing, and I think it's going to be easy until I go out and start talking to people. And this thing is not easy at all. Because first your structure, then what are your key words, what are people thinking, and how are they feeling? So we'll wrap this up in a minute, but I want to just close by my last lesson, and I want to show you an example of how I pull this all together that really make a difference. This is how we learn. Our brain learns by how we link and connect. So life experience is everything. And so your associations that you're building, and what are the chances of two people having the same life experiences that are helping them link into the same words on trust, culture, respect, courtesy, response? But here's the fun part I want you to all get. As we learn, because we associate to what's already there as a base, what happens to our ability to learn as we get older? If this is true, what happens to our ability to learn as we get older? It gets easier
If you practice.
if you're using your brain. So your ability to learn more as you get older actually gets easier. And what's the myth that we have? It gets harder. Not by the science of learning. So we set up, Marshall and I set up this memory competition to prove to people, we took one of the myths that people think I'm either born with a good memory or I missed the boat. And that is BS. There are skills and development and things you can do to enhance your memory if you chose to and have the desire to know what that is. And so I'll take questions, but I did a keynote out in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I did the keynote, and I had a bunch of high school kids in front of me, and I asked the kids, when do we use our memory? And the little boy in the front of the room gets up in front of Mr. Dattino, is that a trick question? And I said, no, I'm serious. And he says to me, in everything we do, from my exams and my dress and whatever. And I said, and when have you learned how to use your memory? And a teacher jumps up out of the back of the room and says, we don't teach that. And I say, isn't this stupid that we have something we use every day in everything we do and we've never learned how it works? Duh. And we don't teach it, which is what the memory competition has really been all about for 20 years, and I'm still banging my head against the wall. Marshall's got a little smarter than that. He says, I ain't banging my head anymore. I'm still banging it.
I just, one thing about as we get older, since our brains tend to work through experience, aren't some of our pathways a little bit more developed? You know, if you're walking through the woods and there's a path that's been clearly used a
Boom.
lot, so you're gonna take that path again as opposed to trying to walk through the brambles.
And there's where you start what he brought up earlier, memory rhythms. Do you retrace and there's a cycle of memory rhythms? Not going to do the memory. There's a cycle that how you move it from short term to long term, but we're not going to.
I was going to say this afternoon, we're going to talk about that. You know, there's this myth that a definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. But in fact, the brain is wired to do the same thing over and over. We lay down those neural patterns and pathways, and we're much more likely to repeat them than not. So the question is, what do you do about it? We're going to talk a little bit about it.
All right. And I want to wrap this up here, and then I got to show you an example of how I've used all this to really create some incredible results that I'm hearing. The brain fills in blanks when given incomplete scenarios. So in your conversation with people, in a conversation with a patient, in a conversation with one of your students or applicants, in your conversation with if you've left them with a blank of information that they are needing, and there's a blank filled in there or blank created, what is their brain doing? Making stuff up. And unfortunately, half of what they make up is not usually accurate, but they're going to make it all up. And so I come in here to the room right now, and I get, you know what, Jess sends a note in that says, you need to call home as soon as you get to your first break. And where's her brain going? My goodness, why am I doing this? So I have a secretary walks into an executive session I'm doing. She walks in and she hands one of the executives a note. He opens the note. I found out later the note said, call home as soon as you get a break, which is where I got that up from. So I could see right away, as soon as he read the note, his face just went pale, blank, and whatever. So I look at him, I said, why don't you go take care of that right now? Because he's not listening to me anymore anyway, so go. And he comes back in the room and he smacks it on the thing and he says, I'm going to kill it when I get home tonight. I said, no, I don't want you to do that. I'm going to kill. What she wanted me to do is pick up a few grocery items before I came home from work. We can torture people. I mean, I've done this with some of my clients where they'll call me up and say, they'll leave me with a blank on purpose, which moves them where? To the top of my return calls list, because I want to fill in the blank. Now, here's where we're going to wrap this up. The word culture. So I was in Texas doing work in San Antonio and on the borders of Mexico and Texas, 2 years of working with the Homeland Security Department. One of the most rewarding pieces of work I think I've ever done. And so we got to spend 2 years down in Brownsville, Texas, where all this stuff goes on across the Rio Grande. Go into the Museum of Multicultural Studies, and there's this big granite rock that they've got, and it defines culture. Everybody's looking for culture these days. They're ingrained patterns of thinking and feeling and how they act and characterize a group of people, which then raises the question, well, how does an environment force a change of ingrained patterns? So again, when I'm working with leaders and trying to change a culture in an organization, what do I want them to remember? First of all, you're changing a culture of ingrained patterns. People have grooves in their heads. They have them in their hearts, which is even worse. It's what are they thinking and how are they feeling that are going to drive their actions. So I got a client that I'm working with, and the CEO and the CNO and the CFO, they want to change culture. I don't know how well you're going to be able to read this, but I have a copy of it that we can pass around. So what am I going to do with this? Well, the first thing I do is I get the senior leaders, and I'll read you what the branches are. Unfortunately, oh God, it's worse than I thought it would be. Forget it. Let me get that off of there. I don't want anybody to even look at this. I'll pass this around. What is the first thing I'm going to do? First thing we do is get them to define culture. So what is that going to mean? So what is the culture that you want to create in the organization? So I had the senior leaders do this first. Back to your point now. I get the senior leaders to do this, and I use something called mind maps to do it. And we had one of the senior leaders loves to draw. So she takes it home on a weekend and starts drawing these nice pictures on it that they brings back to the next meeting. And we pass this out to the leaders, senior leaders, and get them to agree on. What we want to do is embrace the mission of the hospital. We want to have all of our employees fully engaged. We want to be deeply driven and skilled in having people with being self-starters. And we want to be positive and proactive in how we look at our outlook, so we have passionate people who are resilient and they are adaptable to what's happening in our industry. And so the next thing they do with this is what? Got to drop it down to the next level of leaders. Now, as they're dropping it down to the next level of leaders, from what you've learned here in brain-to-brain communication, dropping this down to the next level of leaders says what? The next level of leaders have to do what, Pat?
They have to integrate it. They have to buy into it.
You got it. There's the word. They have to buy into it. Now, how do you find out if they're going to buy into it? Well, you show it to them and you ask them two questions. What do you think about this, and how do you feel about it? Because this is what leadership wants this place to look like. Now, we get the next level of leaders. Now, we don't do that in a formal workshop other than to introduce it to them and break it into tables and get table conversations. But now we got to get to the real world and know what real thoughts and real feelings are. So what are the instructions of the senior leadership? Meet with your leaders one-on-one and drive them through this. And when you're driving them through this and they're looking at it, stare at their face. Now, don't be obvious in staring at their face and, oh, okay, I'm going to stare at your face. But you want to see what their body language is and whether or not they're resonating and generating energy from it. Because the next thing we're going to have to do is take it from that level to go to the front line. Now we're going to introduce this to the front line. I'll tell you what's happened. Top leaders just love it. Man, this is, boy, we are going to use this. And we're going to, by the way, let me tell you how we're going to use this. Team, we're going to use it to hire people. They don't line up to this, they're not getting the job. We're going to use it to evaluate people who are top performers, who need some coaching and development. We're going to use this in terms of even sharing it with our patients. Are you out of your mind? Yeah, because this is what we're going to tell patients we want our people to be, and they're going to tell us whether we're being it or not. Changes the whole thing in terms of what's going on. So now here comes the real world. Top guys love it. Middle level says, well, maybe not. Out of a group of 22, 2 have checked out. They self-checked out, said, I can't do this. That was a good deal. Now they're down to the frontline people, and about 80% are in, and 20% are either getting some coaching or they're going to be checked out. But here's 3 stories I've heard on the hiring side. As the CEO was hiring one of his future executives that checked out or replaced, put this in front, and he said, just by putting this in front with the candidate, and they went through each of these branches, he said, the guy's face lit up, and he says, that's who I am. I offered him the job on the spot. I didn't need to go to anybody else. I wanted this guy, and this guy's turning out to be a superstar. I'm talking to a CNO 2 days ago, and she says, my niece went to interview for a job in this place. And they showed her this mind map thing that you created on culture. And my niece couldn't believe what the interview was like. She said, it is the best hospital I have ever interviewed for in terms of getting a job. Because when I looked at what they were looking for in the people and what they wanted, it was inspiring to me and really getting excited. So I'll leave this up here as you want to take a look at it. But that's where I took the word culture, and then we could talk about the word trust, 2 criticals in the world today, and how do you bring people's thinking together so they align. And by the way, that's not 30-day work that we're talking about here. You don't get these ingrained patterns of thoughts and feelings to change when you have one meeting with one workshop and you say, done. Doesn't work that way when you have people and their hearts into a groove. Let me check a time break here. We can get up. Bathrooms. Okay. We're going to take a 10-minute break if we can. Bathrooms are around the corner, so you got to do a UE. The elements of creating success, and what does that all look like? We're going to look at how the process of GIGO versus GIG fit into that and give you some fun stuff to do with that at the end of the day. And then how does this all come together in terms of, so what's the ultimate formula of taking what we've covered this morning and what Marshall has just finished with you, and then what does your self-talk got to do with this and your self-awareness of what your internal dialogue is all about. So those are the 4 pieces we're going to cover now. And I want to start thinking about the brain-to-brain communication. When you're talking to someone, right, we talked about the stages of brain-to-brain. You're going to ask them to do something, and you want to know 2 things about what you're going to ask them to do. And let's, by way of reviewing this morning, what were the 2 things you'd like to know from somebody when you've asked them to do something? This is a way of reviewing this morning's agenda. Brain-to-brain communication. I've just communicated to someone. I could ask them for what action in terms of what steps are you going to take, which gets me right to, you know what, their actions are not going to line up. You know what, from what they're telling me they're going to do, it just doesn't line up with what I intended for them to do. So now you got to do some Sherlock Holmes work. Now, I'm going to ask them a question to that point. What do you think about what I've asked you to do? So now I want to know, really, are they on board? So what do you think about what I've asked you to do? And the second part of that is, this part, how do you feel about it? How do you feel about that? Now, when you're talking to somebody about their thoughts, hey, is my cortex connected? And is my passion and energy level going to be connected? Now I've got what we will call a clearly defined goal. And the key word here is that we really want to attain. Until I get those 2 parts of a brain connected, I do not have an S. So when you're asking people to do things and you're communicating that to them, you've got to know if they think you're making sense to their brain, and I want to go deeper than understanding, okay, what is their brain thinking and what is their heart telling them about it? And the question I can net this all out is, how bad do you want it? How bad do you want this thing to really, and when I ask somebody how bad you want it, boy, I am really looking for them to jump up and do hoops and hurdles and like really give me the expressions and the body language. I really want this. I don't care if they're going to pound on the desk or I'm going to look at their face. I really want this so bad. I am looking for somebody to really convince me that they're serious about this. So we talk about feedback, and how do I ensure somebody is open for feedback? I got to know they've got a clearly defined goal in their head of what they're trying to achieve. Because if I don't know what that is and they're not passionate about it, any feedback you're going to give them is going to get whacked back in your face, or they're going to just figure out how to avoid you coming at them. Now here's the good news about this. Once you've got the two parts of the brain locked together, we have infinite capacity to create. It's infinite. And our brain will continually generate thoughts or plans to create the outcomes. And I got this, it was a fascinating article, and the Science was updated in 2012 and 2013, but initially I read it in Time magazine 2010. And the article was all about love. When you love something, and this is about how your love life keeps you healthy. And what was fascinating about love, and the science they took in 2010 that was updated 2012 and 13, which basically said right on target, and we're certifying the research, is when our brain has, or let's talk about our whole body, when our body has a love for creating some relationship, or has a love for creating an outcome, then the emotional brain talks to the rational brain to figure out how to. But if you don't have the desire, the passion, energy, enthusiasm to create the outcome, then your brain will figure out the excuses as to why not. Because it wants to make you feel good and make you feel that there's a reason for you not getting to what you said, so therefore it'll downshift and now you're in a whole different pattern. So the fascinating part about the love life, it was saying, when you have a love for some relationship or desire that really to achieve some outcome, then the emotional part of your brain creates a laser focus for the cortex to keep working it until you get there. But now what gets in the way of all that? Our brain is sensitive to the types of input it is given. Because 1 + 1 equals infinity in a brain that is synergistic. So one of the first lessons that I learned, and I started to study this, is realizing your brain is synergistic. It's going to go 1 + 1 is going to equal a whole lot of stuff. And I got into this, and you see this on commercials, right? They talk about our brains yet as if it's garbage in, garbage is out. But the problem is it's not a 1-for-1 transaction. One thought into a brain added to another thought in your brain, garbage in, garbage will grow. We can grow garbage dumpsters in our brain, given the first position G. And it's been fascinating because I've read so many books about self-improvement, and people are like, oh, that's Pollyanna, and that's all, but you know what? Break it down into its pieces. Where are we getting inputs into our brain? What books are we reading? What music do we play? What people do we hear? What television shows do we watch? And I always remember this. And he was criticized so terribly, and this is not a political conversation. But I always remember Dan Quayle, when he was running for office, talked about the television in America is gradually eroding our value systems. And he was so bashed for that and so criticized, and yet watched the television programs from the time he ran for vice president and where they are today, and we have just eroded our values. Because we have people watching these. It was almost like what Marshall gave you is a perfect example of his dinner time conversation. And what was the gig at his dinner time conversation? Who can have the sharpest zing to another member of the family? And that's what we talk about at dinner. Isn't that exciting? And he picks that up and he carries that forward as part of his normal behavior that he doesn't even distinguish anymore. Now here's The wonderful part about humans. We can change the first position, G, to what? Good in, and good will grow. And what I've learned with some of my clients is some of them have got the audacity, and they're so crazy that they can come back and say, and greatness in, and greatness will grow. Who's going to be best in the country? It can be us. Why not? So what we all need to be sensitive of, and this was my first, with Tony Buzan in this class, he said, how would you like to see where your life is going to be in 5 years? I said, wow, would I love to see where my life is going to be in 5 years? It's like the crystal ball. So let me have the crystal ball. So he had, again, there's 44 executives in this session that we attended here in New York City. I was one of them. And he has us do a mind map. And he says, at least 5 branches on the map. So what do we put on the map? What are 5 things that influence your thinking? Now, what could 5 things be that influence your thinking? Well, what music do you listen to? What people that are alive do you listen to? Now, he broke people into 2 categories. What people that are alive that influence your thinking? What people that have been dead that influence your thinking? What about your social interactions? Who do you socialize with? Who do you... And so we went, what television programs, what books do you read? And so he gave us a whole menu of things. And so right off the bat, I had my kids for me at one of my birthday gifts give me Dad's top 20 hits. And I started to distinguish the words in the music. And my top 20 hits, people were always dying, relationships were always breaking up, life was hating one another, and I listened to that in my car going back and forth to work 40 minutes every day. Because my ears don't distinguish words in music. So if you put a music song and say, what are the words in that? And here I'm listening to it, yet they're getting into your brain on the 7th or 8th listen. What people was I listening to? Well, Mom would have convinced me to live in a cave by now. The world is evil. You can't trust people. They're all out to get you in some fashion. And I love Mom. But I had to learn how to distinguish what was I buying. How about the books I was reading? You know what books I was reading at this time? I'm looking at this thing. What books am I? I'm reading about baseball. I can tell you I'm reading the sports page every day. I can tell you who the highest batting average was and who was the best player and who was in first place. And I could give you data. And Buzan walks over to me and he looks at me, he says, just looking at your map, he says, by chance, are you going to be a sports announcer someday? And I said, hell no, that's not what I was. He says, well, I think you're reading the wrong books. He said, have you been to any professional workshops at all? Are you reading any professional books? Changed my whole reading. Changed it upside down. You know, who are the people in your life that you go to lunch with? And what are you talking about? Okay. I started working with clients. I used to stand out. This was like the best place to ever stand. Was outside where it's great because they chase you out of the building now for smoking. Go stand outside and listen to people talk at a smoke break. I wouldn't want any of them dealing with anybody when they get back into the building. Because what are they talking about during smoke breaks? What were we talking about our IBM turkeys that ran the company? And we'd sit around and talk at lunch. And so our gig, when I began to realize if I'm going to look at my 5 years and where I was going to be in 5 years, who was I associating with? Who was I listening to? What books was I reading? What music did I have to do? I always loved this here. I was going to a health gym up in New Rochelle. I go to the gym, and you're listening to this rap music. We're going to kill cops. We're going to kill one another. We're going to do this to the female. And I'm like, this is a health club? And this is the music that we're playing, and we call this rap music? I call this poison to our brain. It's like, and this is what we're programming people to live by and then go out and copy behaviors and things. So this thing called gig became an extremely important piece of my life. And focusing on what inputs was I getting and how do I discriminate what those inputs are to ensure that what those inputs are were giving me what I would call truth and what I could trust. That could take me where I wanted to go, but I had to define where I wanted to go. So I had to figure that out. Because once I figured out where I wanted to go, then my brain would continue to figure out how to help me to get there. But there are some more pieces that had to come together. So let's think about your gig. And let me drop an assignment on you. This is a life-changing assignment. Some of you may already be doing this. When you go home this evening and you transition from your work day and you've gotten home from work and now you're going to go back into your personal life, the first thing I want you to do is to anybody you socialize with this evening, the first thing I want you to ask them is, can you tell me 3 things about your day that were really fun? That were really something you learned or did, that put a smile on your face, that picked up your step, that brought some bounce into your life. But give me 3 things that at least brought some joy to your day. Do not ask the question, how was your day? You'll get the kitchen sink. It's amazing to me, years ago, through the work that Marshall and I were doing the Memory Championship, I got to meet a producer of TV programs. And I was talking to him about the gig, and he said, Tony, you're not going to believe this. He said, but we've test piloted a show that was going to be all about good things that were happening in people's lives. And in our pilot studies, it bombed. We've been so conditioned. I live in Orlando now. I tell the folks in Florida, the news in Orlando is worse than the news in New York. Because I'll get up every time I'm doing a workshop and I'll put on the 6 a.m. news. We got lots of people getting killed in Orlando. We got lots of druggies. We got lots of rapes. We got lots of police getting shot. I mean, Orlando is like, I should be living in a cave in Orlando. Forget about anywhere else.
You work for that Chamber of Commerce?
What do we get in the news? It's unbelievable. So, and what are we conditioned? And I used to be a news junkie. I mean, I got to get the 5 o'clock news, the 6 o'clock news. You can get 7 now. You can get 10 o'clock news. You get 11 o'clock. You can get news all day long. And then have a nice night's sleep. No. You know, there's one of the commentators that did the light. I finally said, you know what, I'm not listening to this guy anymore. Just can't do that and then go to sleep. So who do you listen to before you go to bed? What music do you listen to? What books do you read before? And now go have a pleasant night's dream. So this became significant. So you go home tonight and you ask the person that you're going to be socializing with, what were some good things about their day? And there are 2 things. They're going to, first of all, figure out you've been brainwashed. So how you do that, you got to sneak up on them subtly. Number 2, you got to do that for 5 minutes. Now, what do I mean you have to do that for 5 minutes? You cannot succumb to nothing. You know, what was good about your day? What did you do wrong? You need to figure out, as a leader of changing your own synergy, how do you generate that type of dialogue with the people around you that you care and love and socialize with? How do you bring that to the table and get them to focus on, so let's talk about the good things. Now, that does not dismiss that life doesn't bring stuff. Stuff happens to all of us. But what you'll do, and I want you to notice this, is what you'll notice is, you keep practicing this and practices and practices, what you'll begin to notice, and when life throws its stuff at you, all of a sudden you're going to say, and I can handle it, as opposed to, it's going to weight me down. And I got to see this. I was very fortunate when Marshall and I started running the memory competition. Tony Buzan, I'd pick him up at the airport. He comes from London, and I'd pick him up, or he'd fly in on the SST, and I'd go pick him up at the airport. And the first year I'm in my consulting work and doing my thing, I'd pick him up at the airport, and he says to me, so how was your work this year? How was your business doing? And I just dumped on him every darn problem and every miserable thing, and this isn't working, and that's not working, and I just unloaded the kitchen sink on him. And he says to me, perchance, did anything good happen this year? Okay. Something must have been good, right? We go to the second year of doing this routine, pick him up in year 2, pick him up at the airport, Same drill. And I dumped the kitchen sink on him again. And he says, perchance, has anything good happened this year? So by third year, I smartened up. Yeah, I'm ready for it. And what am I ready for? So how was your year? And I said, I did this, I got this accomplished, this is working out right, this is, boy, this has been like really been terrific. And he says, perchance, has anything happened that's been a problem? And I said, yes, they have, but I don't want to talk about them. It just changed. At that moment, it hit me of the power of our internal gig and what we hear and listen to and whatever. So in the work we've done, Evelyn, by the way, is my colleague, and we got to go work with 7th and 8th graders. It was one of the most life-changing events for these 7th and 8th graders. In fact, I just did a podcast with one of the CNOs with her kid, and what a world of difference this has made in her 2 kids. We did this work for 7th and 8th graders, and we had them do a mind map of the 5 things that influence their thinking. 5 things, and they did these mind maps, and you could just see who they were hanging out with, who they went to play basketball with, what television programs. We got invited back to their 8th grade graduation. So we had like 25 kids in this program. We got invited back, and we were like 2 celebrities walking in on their graduation, with parents coming over to us saying, what did you do with my kid? What did you do with my daughter? What did you do with my son? They've changed who they're hanging with. They've changed what TV shows. They don't watch some of these junky TV shows anymore. I've tried for years to not, whatever the magic was that you and Evelyn did with these kids, it's been night and day. So I was just talking to her, to the CNO on a podcast. I said, so tell me how Maxie's doing. She said, Tony, everything you taught him, he's in college, it's like he lives it day after day. It has made such a world of difference in his life. It's almost like I'm listening to little Tony when I listen to my son. And I said, how about your daughter? And it's like, she's taken the mind mapping, she's taken the gig. I mean, she's a ball of fire. She's going to do anything she wants to do in life. And you catch them in 7th and 8th grade, it's amazing what you can do with kids at that level and really make a difference in their thinking. And then I'll close down a last story. This I could talk to forever. The stories I've created are for people who have applied this lesson. So Charlie is a Con Edison worker. Works at Con Edison here in New York City. And Charlie comes to a GRI workshop, and we're going through this process stuff, which we're going to wrap up with later. And Charlie comes to the workshop, big rough guy, big curly bushy hair, beard. I don't know if you know Charlie. Anyway, Charlie comes to the workshop. And at the end of the day, I used to come up with about an inch worth of science articles and stuff, and he comes working up to the workshop, and he says to me, can I borrow that stuff? I want to see where you're getting all this stuff from. So I say, Charlie, as long as it's back on my table at 7:30 tomorrow morning, you're welcome to take it home and read it. It was months later, Charlie, next morning it's on the table. The short story, months later, I get a call on a Saturday at home, and it's Charlie on the phone, and he said, my wife would like to speak with you. You remember we said about blanks? Like, oh, God, what did I do to this guy? And his wife wants to speak to me. Except she gets on the phone, and she starts with, Mr. Dattino, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you've done, but I want to thank you for giving me my Charlie back. Charlie goes home and does this exercise with 2 boys that were in middle school, 7th, 8th grade, going into high school. And as she tells the story, I just want to tell you, my boys were called the stupid kids. That was their label, learning disabled and the stupid kids. And she said, Charlie came home from this workshop that you did, and he sat at the table, and he looked at the boys, and he said, boys, what was something that was good that happened during your school day today? And the boys looked at me like, where did this man just come from? Because Charlie's normal dinner conversation started with every F word that you could imagine existed, and it was his boss and his wife and his family and his kids. I mean, all of us were just part of the F words in his world. And what I learned from talking to Charlie later is he realized that my stupid kids may have been coming from my stupid conversations. And if I change those conversations, let me see what I do for my 2 boys. So he changes the dialogue, and he says to the boys, whatever. The next thing he does is helps her clean up dishes, and he helps the boys. He goes to the boys, you got some assignments that you want to do. And he takes them into the living room and he does mind maps with them. And we're not covering mind maps today, but it's a tool that we teach to help kids really synthesize their learning so they really embed it into their long-term thinking. And so he teaches them that, and the next thing, she says, the next thing that's happening, Mr. Datino, is my boys are getting B's and A's on their exams, and the principal's calling us into school and asking us, you need to find out what your two boys are doing that's cheating, because we know they can't, they got to be cheating. They couldn't have gone from D's and F's to B's and A's without cheating. And I thought Charlie was going to leap over the desk and kill him. But he told him about this mind mapping thing and whatever. And the short story of that, so I write the book. It's in my Grassroots Leader book. It's one of my favorite life-changing stories of all times. And so I called Charlie, send him a book, and he says, you got the story exactly right. It's exactly the way it's happened. And so I asked Charlie, how are the boys doing? He says, okay, miracle of miracles. They're both through high school. One has gone off to college, which for my wife and I is not believable. And the other's enlisted in the Navy. He wants to see the world. Now, his wife closes the story. And Mr. Datino, I can only say the Lord brought you to me at a most incredible time in my life, because that morning I had been to a lawyer and I've asked him to draw up divorce papers because I had had enough. So she's closing this story down. Thank you for giving me my Charlie back. I don't know what you've done. And so when I wrote the book and I talked to Charlie, he says, my wife and I are still kicking. Got a lot further than I thought we were going to get. And the last time I saw Charlie, I did not recognize him. No more beard, hair was cut, body had slimmed down. It was like a whole different person. All coming off of this exercise. I can tell you, and I can go on and on, people tell me I should write a book just on the gig stories. I could write a whole book on people that have applied this piece of simple work to coming up with, so what are some of the good things that are going on in our lives that give us the power to know we can do it. And what happened here? Okay, Andrew. Hopefully, Evelyn, Andrew, help. Oh, okay. So, no, I want this now because it's right where I'm going. So now let me give you the model. Let's tie up the whole morning so far and the whole day. So the first thing one must always be able to do is clearly define what the S is. What is S? And is it sensible and is it emotional? Can I lock in? Our brain is then going to start making a whole lot of attempts to get there. Here's what's important. From the brain's point of view, I'm sure you've all heard this. Experience is your best teacher. So you got to do something. You got to take the thinking and the planning stage and you got to implement it. You got to actually take an action. Here's what's hard for humans to buy or accept. Taking the action doesn't mean it always has to be good. Sometimes we learn some of our most valuable lessons, though we may hate them in those moments, from something that we did that's a screw up. You know what? This was dumb. But what is essential, Marshall has spent a whole lot of time to it, is that you have feedback in your system in order to know how you've done. So I write in this book, feedback is our lifeline to success. If you compromise a feedback system, you have destroyed your... if you've compromised your feedback system, real easy. It's like you're throwing the dice on the table in a casino. And the casino's going to beat you most of the times. The feedback... Now here's what... When Marshall's talking feedback, it's like, oh, this fits so perfectly. This is like awesome. The feedback has to have relevance to the S. What am I trying to accomplish? What am I trying to achieve? If I don't have that clearly defined, then feedback is going to be hardwired to be taken as a personal attack in the front. You got to get that message. If you don't know a person's S, you have no space to give them feedback without getting whacked back or having them avoid you when they see you coming down the hall. So when I'm coaching CEOs and I'm coaching vice presidents to go get feedback from their folks, the first thing I'm telling them they've got to do and lay out in their environment is, what are you trying to accomplish? And they got to believe it. It's in your head and it's in your heart, or otherwise you're not getting real feedback. So when I'm doing rounding on patient rooms and we're working with guests in a hotel, the first thing I'm doing is, do you know this is a faith-based hospital? And I can tell you more than half the patients had no clue. Hey, not bad to have a goal that patients didn't know anything about. But do you know what the goal of the hospital is? And anytime I'll get a patient that whether they do or they don't know it, people look at me like, how do you get such much? You get feedback like unbelievable, like we never can do. I say, sure you can. I said, first thing I ask patients, do you know what the goals of the hospital are? Do you know what our priorities are and how we're caring for you? And most patients don't know that, other than keep me alive. Keep me alive and give me some decent food. Those are about the two things you get.
They get one. If they're lucky. They get one if they're lucky.
Yeah, you got it. And so there you go. And so if they don't know what your goals are, how are they going to give you feedback? So it's easy for me to get feedback. I walk in, I say, I'm here to really understand how we can make sure that you're getting the best clinical care and having the best experience you might be able to have in a hospital. And they've hired me to find out if there's something not consistent with that objective. Now, what do you think people are going to tell me? They'll give me the kitchen sink, which I'll need. And I'm looking at them face to face to see, is there integrity in that face? So just a couple of quick cues. What are their eyes doing? What might their nose be doing? What, in some cases, people are chewing up in here as they're going. You watch their ears go. Just a couple of highlights. I'm not going to teach you the whole class, but there's at least 3 or 4 cues you can immediately pick up. Watch where their eyes go. Watch where their sides go. Watch where their nose is twitching. Watch what happens to the lips. And you can just take those 4, and you got 80% of it. You're not doing FBI criminal investigation here. You're just trying to find out if people are telling you the truth that you can then use to help them to improve the performance you're trying to do that helps impact their lives. And what is so amazing to me is people, this is their life at stake. They're going to get meds. They're going to get doctor stuff. How many people won't tell you the truth? Why not? Because they're afraid of getting their nurse in trouble. They're afraid of what they may do to them on the next go-around, on the next jab, or you know what? They over-medicate people. They give us infections when we go to hospitals. Oh, they're going to bring in the germs and sprinkle them all over my bed, so I can't talk to anybody if I tell them the truth and get a nurse in trouble. What people do sometimes is not, common sense is rare sense. So in order to give a person feedback of any kind, or in order to get it, you want somebody to give you feedback, you got to make it clear to them what your objectives are. What is your intent of wanting to get feedback? What are you trying to accomplish? And you got to be able to explain that to them so they understand the logic of it and they understand your heart is in it. That creates the space. When Marshall was talking about, I was thinking like spatial intelligence. It's like, how do we create space to give and get feedback? So you create space by knowing what a person's S is. If you don't know what their S is, you can't give them feedback without risking you getting popped. And when you give them feedback, and Marshall, again, he was nailing this right down and giving you the details. When you're giving them feedback, you have to have relevance to things when he said you got to be specific, it's got to be something you observed. What did you observe them doing? And it has to be relevant to what they're professing they passionately want to achieve. And if they're not passionate about it, you get to what I call a moment of truth. And I'll tell you how I've discovered the moment of truth. I find out if they're really serious or not. But the feedback has to have integrity. Because you give somebody feedback when somebody's, and I love this, so how am I doing? Well, you're doing great. But I'll go tell 4 people in the hallway around the coffee clutch that they're all, you believe that turkey thinks he's doing really terrific? What an idiot. He buys this garbage. That's really helping him. You know, I always remember going into the chairman's office and the president of IBM's office, a conference with the, and I went in there and basically dropped a bunch of feedback that was not pleasant. And unfortunately, I didn't know at the time, but I took the harpoon because I was the messenger. So I got the harpoon. with the executive assistant saying, you upset the president. You don't do that in this room. But I spoke the truth. It doesn't matter. You don't do that. You've upset him. And now he's angry at us. How do you give people feedback? So before I'm working with any organization, and we start doing some of these workshops that we're talking about, the first thing I'm always wanting to do, and this is that trust thing we've been talking about today, I got to know what they really want to accomplish. And is it in their head and their heart? Because that creates the space for me to sit down and have one-on-ones. It creates the space for me to have team meetings and have conversation and facilitate the dialogue. It creates the opening for me to get people to talk about the things that are relevant to what the organization is trying to achieve. And so, yes, it's amazing how many different hotels and even the banks and airlines, hospitals, I can just pick on any of the industries, where the workers are not locked into what we call the experience today. They are just not locked into the experience. They're locked into what their lives are happening and what they're getting paid and what they're trying to get done and all the extra work they're being asked to do. That's what they're focused on. And yet the boss is getting paid many times in bonus stuff today. They're getting paid on patient or customer satisfaction or guest satisfaction or whatever it might be. And so they're on one page and the frontline people are on another page and the two aren't together. It isn't until you get sustainability, until you get this locked down, and it's that exercise I talked about this morning, getting something like this dropped down to where the whole organization is on board. And once you've got that, you can hold him accountable for something not going on here. She can hold you accountable for something going on here. It doesn't matter what level you are in the organization. It doesn't matter who you are in terms of teams. We collectively are all committed to these behaviors in our culture. And anyone that I see not in line with those behaviors can be called for an accounting by anyone. So we were talking about it earlier. I loved it. It's Jim, right? Jim, he nailed this. He nailed something we were talking about here at lunch over this table. In my work in any organization, when I see the folks at the lower levels, you know, the folks that aren't so smart, that are doing some of the menial jobs, and I say that with big tongues in both sides of my cheek. In the hospital world, we call them the transporters or nutritional services. Those are the, what could they possibly know? So what could a transporter possibly know? They're only wheeling a patient from one place to another, and anytime I followed a transporter around going from one place to another, the patient is talking to him. Duh! What are they talking to you about? The care I'm getting. I mean, that patient is worried and stressed and anxious, a guest in a hotel. They'll find somebody, at the front desk and they'll talk. Security people, anytime there's security people, people come out waiting, they'll talk. Do we ever get those people together and say, what are they talking about? What they're talking about is their experience inside your institution. I mean, I can't tell you the number of elevators. I've been in a hotel, any building I go to sometimes. I'll talk to somebody, I'll just start up a conversation. So what do you think about this company? You just doing something here with this bank? What do you think about them? And people will tell you. My goodness. They'll tell you what they think about them, and they'll tell 10 other people what they think about them. So what I'm saying is so many organizations compromise their own feedback systems. They compromise holding one another accountable because they haven't done the work that really demands that everybody gets on board with the S. And I love it because when I do rounding, especially frontline people, and then I'll take it up to the manager, I'll say, okay, on 1 to 10, can you tell me how committed you are to the S that the organization is trying to achieve? That is a trick question, by the way. So that's what we have an S. Where is that? Okay. So here it is. This is the S. Can we sit down and go look at it? So that's the first. I'll go back to the leaders and say, okay, leaders, what have you done with this work that we've done in the workshops? Number 2, have you tested thinking and feeling out? Back to those exercises you talked about this morning. Essential. This is where all the work is. So now you go back and you finally get all that work done. And now I still want to know, when I do rounding and I talk to frontline people, I say, hey, yeah, we got it. Or tell me what the main branches are. Okay, we can give it to you. Now, what is your commitment to what you think you can do from 1 to 10? Now, what's underneath that? What is the only number that I find acceptable to an infinitely creative brain? 10. And I get that probably 1 out of 10 times. I get 8s and 9s. If I get an 8 and 9, what do I already know? They're not there. We got more leadership work to do. We got to go back to square one and go back and visit the S. Getting an S identified in an organization of 100 people is hard work. Putting it in an org of 1,000 people takes not for the weak at heart. And it takes for the senior team to really get the things we're talking about here today, to run a marathon race and then some. Where do I go here? I want to put Marshall's story together. Let me just check time stamp. China. Let me just check the time. Good. All right, I'm good. So my first client, I leave IBM. I'm out here in the real world. I've been asked to come in and work with an executive team and his directors and build this thing into a world-class power. That was my first assignment, and now I'm on my own. When you're on your own, you can get unemployed real quick. You know, when people say they're on their own, I want to work for myself, I say, you better rethink that, man. You better really have a second go at this. You think working on your own is so easy. Let me tell you, it's really a 24/7 job. You don't set your own hours, believe it or not. So here I am, my first thing, I go to this meeting, I got the boss's S, we've sat down and we've done several conversations. I really want to know, he's behind it, he really buys into it. And now I go to a meeting and I watch his interaction with his 8 senior leaders. And as I'm watching his interaction with his 8 senior leaders, one of the guys pops up and says something, and the boss takes his feet, pushes him on the table, and pushes his chair back, and he goes like this. And the other 7 guys all dove under the table, like, uh-oh. It was a 3-hour meeting, a couple other things went on. But I need to go back to the boss and give him some feedback. You know this thing he's talking about, some feedback? He's got a blind spot. Because nobody on his team is going to tell him the emperor's got no clothes on. Why? Because he pushes back. But what would you do with somebody pulling that on you? Would you give him what, you think you're going to get him upset with or whatever? So anyway, he pushes that back. I got to go in and talk to him. So now watch how I put all this together from what Marshall was talking about, brain-to-brain communication. First thing I got to do is I got to make sure he and I are locked in on his S. The second thing I got to be aware of is where am I going to have this conversation? And I was smart enough to know I could not have the conversation in his office. Why not? It's his turf on number one. He's got to, and plus his secretary thinks she can interrupt anything she wants to interrupt. I stood out in his office enough where she would just buzz in one after another. This is important. Everybody's important, and she just felt she had the power to decide who's going to buzz in. So we decide we're going to go out to the pub. We're going to go to his Friday night. He likes to go get a drink and have a beer at the pub. I'm going to drink club soda, and so we're going to go sit at the pub. So the first thing we're doing is we sit down at the pub. We get a nice table. It's early, and 5 o'clock at a pub on a Friday night wasn't bad, so we had a pretty good spot to ourselves. And the first thing I did is I said, I want to make sure I understand your S. So I'm repeating his S, which now gives me what? The ability to watch his, and he says, I really want this. And it goes like this, I really want this. And he puts his beer bottle down. He says, I really want this. Hey, I think he's for real. He really wants this. So the next thing I do, Marshall covered this. It was so, listening to him today, it was like, that's why I said this was so perfect. So I get this locked in, and I say, hey, I want to give you some feedback on a couple of the meetings I've sat in on and observed, and I want to let you know what's going on. And I already gave his team a couple of heads ups and say, I'm sending them back to you, because you guys are going to learn how to give them feedback, because I ain't going to be here forever. So the first thing I did was I told him, I said, let me tell you 3 things I've watched you do in these meetings that really are transforming what you're trying to accomplish. I said, let me tell you 3 things that you did have been really terrific. And he looks at me and he says, you mean I'm not a horse's ass anymore? You think about what he said to you earlier. Senior executives are used to hearing what? All the bad stuff. What's not working, what's not working, what's not working. And here I start off the conversation by telling him 3 good things that he's done that really were superb. Keep doing these things. These are the things that are going to help change the organizational culture. And then it's time for me to give him, and here are a couple of things I watch you do, and he does, really? Did I really do that? Let me tell you, well, God, I was just pushing back. I wasn't trying to, boy, who's ever reading my body language, they read the wrong book. Hey, guess what? They read it. They shut up. So now I give them the feedback, but now when I'm going to give anybody feedback, the other thing that I'm always ready for is this Adam model. I got to tell them what they might be able to do differently the next time. Because if I can't tell them what they should do differently the next time, then what right do I have to give them feedback? If I can't alter and give them a better way of doing it, then who am I to make a judge and say what you did was really bad, unless I can say, and here's what you could have done differently. So here's where I've learned that what I call the moment of truth. I lock in my S, got to know that that's solid. When I'm giving anyone feedback, I will pause after this right here. And I will pause for 2 things. Number 1, if you don't believe what I'm telling you, you might want to go check with these 3 people. I'm always giving them 3 people. Go check with them and see if, look, by the way, I told these 7 people, he's coming. So I gave him a heads up. He's coming. Second, I got to make sure I have an adjustment. But here's the secret. After you give somebody feedback, if you want to find out if they're buying your feedback, here's the pause. Joe, you've gotten your feedback. You can go test it. When you're ready for some suggestions on what you might do differently, I'm ready. What will that tell you? If they're serious enough about their S, and if they've accepted your feedback. So before I deal with some pretty high-level folks, so that's how you stay alive. Deal with high-level folks and be politically smart, but also live by this. Hey, boss, when you're ready for some suggestions on how to execute and implement some changes, I'm ready to give you the ideas and recommendations. And this first time I did this, he says, I'm ready, give it to me. Which immediately told me what? He's ready. I got it. I can see what you're telling me, and I'm ready. So I gave him 3 suggestions, and now what am I going to watch for? How he reacts, but now in the next month or so, what am I going to be looking for him in his staff meetings and any session? Is he doing it? Is he taking any of the things? So I suggested a book he read. Within a week, he calls me back and says, man, that book you told me to read, fantastic. I can see myself in that book. I can see some of the things. Man, I read the book already. Got it. And so what I'm looking for, and I'll do this with anybody. There's one thing that will turn me off and have me walk the other way is if I give somebody some suggestions and they just flush it. Don't waste my time. I'm going to take my time to give you some suggestions and give you some adjustments to make. At least use one of them. One of the things, and I don't know how I'll get to see some of you after this day, one of the things I want to take people and throw them against the wall, is the gig assignment. I'll bring them back. In all my workshops, I always bring people back for a follow-up day. What have you done with what you've learned? And how are you using it to change your life and change the performance of your work? And that gig exercise, as I give stories about it and go over and over, and the people give me their own stories, I still find about 60% of the people that come through this workshop will not do that gig exercise. It breaks my heart. It's like, God, this is life-changing. And you're telling me 6 out of 10 won't use it? They are probably the same folks that ignore the advice from their doctors that would rather die than turn around and live. I just haven't figured that out yet. Let's go to the last piece of this. So now I want to put you around the table. And again, we'll have a table exercise on this. This is always a fun part of this piece of work. We're going to hit some bumps. We're going to hit some bumps. When you hit a bump, what do you say into the environment? And what do you think? So quickly huddle up. When you hit a bump in your life, something doesn't go right for you, what are you saying into the environment? What do you put out there in your words and your actions? And second of all, what are you thinking that you don't verbalize? So think of a bump you've hit. You just screwed something up, and man, this was a real beaut. What are you verbalizing to anybody that'll listen to you? And what are you thinking that you elect not to verbalize? So hurry up, huddle up. Individual, and then we'll have somebody read it out for the table. So talk to it amongst yourselves, and then we'll read it out. Hear you.
First I'm disappointed, and then I self-reflect.
All right, so what are you saying?
What am I saying?
Yeah, what do you...
Oh, I can't believe I did that.
Okay, I can't believe I did that. At least you're being a little soft on yourself, but I can't believe I did that. Now, the second part of that. What are you thinking up here that you're not verbalizing to anybody? As much as you can say in the public arena.
Thinking, well, boy. I'm thinking, wow, am I able? Am I capable?
Yeah.
Am I
There you go.
capable of completing this task or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Am I capable?
Can I translate for you? You are so stupid and such an idiot that you just can't figure it out. How's that grab you?
That grabs me.
Where's that gig going? All right. Good work. Thanks for being so candid. That's great transparency. Wow, I've never broke it down, but let's see. Did he answer it differently than the... Wow, so you got to clue us in. Marshall, pay attention here. The men and women do this differently. We got to hear this. So your feedback or your internal was, or what you verb?
was the same. We're awful, we screwed up.
All right, see, they're awful as bad as you are here. See this?
The external is, well, yeah, that one didn't work, but you know, we make some changes, and do better next time.
Do you see that? And what did the lady say here? Your mistake. You screwed up. I like that better. Isn't that better?
Oh, it feels better.
All right. I wouldn't always catch men doing that, though. Well, let's wait till we got a couple more men in here. I'll give you what I hear most on that, but let's go over to here. What do we get here? When you want to understand what? What happened, right? Keep going. Now, if you're a male, where do you want to go with that? Yeah, that's not... Okay, is that where men going to want to go? I'm putting you on the spot here. I'll tell you where most men want to go.
Well, most of them want to give advice, gratuitous advice.
They want to give advice. What else do they want to know? For sure, but what else do they want to know? Who did it? Now, why do I want to know who did it? I want to blame somebody. I might even give them a beating along the way. So how do I punish them in some capacity? That's what I see more in the men. So good question, Judy. I like it. And so when you start getting me to think about it, a woman is more apt to go the other route. Okay, what happened? How do we get this? Yeah, sorry. And we all feel a little bit of that pain. Whereas the men are like, okay. What's that, Pat?
Women.
Yes. Drives you nuts that what? Women or?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I love it. I love it. How about over here? What do we get? Thank you.
All right, so mine was publicly, I usually say it's my first attempt at learning. Fail.
Okay.
F-A-I-L. It's my first attempt at like
I
to
got
know
first
where
attempt
the
at
business
learning.
is
I
going.
like it. Okay.
And privately, I always say this: do I still want this goal?
See, watch out now. You're backing off your goal, which is the other side of feeling okay.
That's,
Yeah.
well, it's a
I'm with
question for the next step. If
I
I'm
got
going to
it.
do it, I have to either apply what I've learned, or maybe go twice as hard, or whatever the case may be. So, do I still want this goal? Because I have to have that same passion.
Otherwise, you're going to stay down and find out why not. And you'll figure, by the way, your brain will figure that out for you. Why not is just as good as how to.
And what I say is, a couple weeks ago, I had the privilege of hearing Norman Lear, who turned 95 this year.
Okay.
And he said his mantra was, when something happens, over, next. Okay?
Let it go.
So, right?
Move on.
On to the next thing. I mean, my personal mantra is, patience, persistence, positive, and passion in terms of that's always my public mantra, and I don't try to bitch a lot. But thinking is what I say to myself, and this is the way I'm made up. I don't think, what did I do wrong? I think, what could I have done better?
It's our internal gigs that take us in one direction to the other. And we'll wrap it up here.
And we are very similar in terms of where we use different words.
Okay.
Which are not
I'd have to say that either I'm so different, or I'm not hearing like really frank speech here, because I'd have to describe what I say only by using the initials. So I would say like O-F, and then I'd say F-M-F, and then I'd say W-T-F, and then I'd say, okay, been through this before, where do we go from here?
But follow the thinking that stays in his head in terms of his gig. Would you put that in positive or negative gig?
I would put it in a positive.
His F and...
Well, maybe not the language,
Okay.
but
So beating himself up is a good thing?
no, I think he's venting, but he's venting, and then he's saying, what do I do next? He's not giving up. He's disappointed, but then he moves past that quickly and says, you know what? Where do I go from here?
Okay. You're a good salesperson for him, but I'm not going to take it.
He also sounded like he was angry at the situation, not at what he did to cause that
Okay.
problem.
All right. So I'm going to leave you with, because we can go in all different places, I'm going to leave you with this one. The next time you're involved with something that doesn't work quite as well, I want you to be mindful of what are you saying, but more importantly, what's your internal gig. Now, here's what I've learned. It's real simple. Beating myself up serves absolutely no valuable purpose. And I used to just destroy myself. How stupid, how can I be so dumb, how did I not see this happening? And I still slip into those things every once in a while. And so I still, after 20 plus years of doing this stuff, I cannot tell you I am perfect. But boy, do I, at least when I find myself beating myself into the turf, do I stop and say, wait a minute. Now here's what I try to say sometimes, and here's where we'll bring this to an example and close for a break. Realize when we have a goal and we can be passionate about that goal, any goal that we want to achieve in life is going to have some bumps. You know, I more and more you read about this stuff and successful people, they've all hit a bump. Here's what I'd love to see you be able to change your self-talk to. How interesting. How fascinating. Look at what I've done or created, and what may I learn from it. It's a much softer way of talking to yourself that allows you to say, okay, what I've just done is interesting. It's rather fascinating. Wow. But what am I going to be able to learn from it? Because it's in the learning that you really continue the journey. And if you're going to, and we all have said this, right? And I think it was Marshall started the definition of insanity, to keep doing the same thing over and over and expect different results. It's in that learning moment where we take these leaps, and as you take those leaps, it's in the longer term where you get to your pot of gold. So let me close up the first 3 sections of our day, putting us all together. So here's a hospital, Big S, that we've been working on. And what they want to do is they want to have exceptional patient experiences, clinical outcomes in a safe environment for the hospital. We want to be all connected. We want to be connected with our partners, the physician. We want to be connected to the community. We want to have access to network development so we can grow our services in the community. And we want to have a navigation of the whole healthcare system. We're going to treat a continuum of care where it is, you've said it earlier, the whole person. So we're treating the whole, and what's changing in the hospital world today is the whole doesn't exist enclosed at discharge. In fact, the whole is, are they taking their meds and are they getting to their doctors, and how do we take care of a person so they're not coming back in less than 30 days? Because if they do, we're not going to get paid by Medicare, so now we got a real problem. We're going to do this thing called Creation Health. And what's important is we're going to start it with our employees first. We're going to make sure our employees are healthy. And then we'll drop that down to the patients and make sure that they're following in the Creation Health principles, and then we'll drop it to community others. Then we've got to be affordable, right? Our gross national product and all this other stuff, man, we better figure out how to employ process innovation techniques, which is going to be my last presentation after Marshall's. We got to realize patients don't have infinite dollars anymore. They're getting pressures on their co-payments are going up, and they're very, very sensitive. So there's a lot of pressure on affordable. And we got to be mindful of our own resources and how we learn from one another and how we grow to best practice. And last but not least, we got to have this thing called strategic growth. But we got to nurture and develop our own talent and train and create pathways for people so that they want to send the best people to us, and we certainly want to retain those. And so there's what I'll call an S that has taken months, in fact, 9 months, to get this consolidated and locked to say, and now I can show you 1,000 people who are all lunatics about making this happen. There's probably 100 of them that aren't quite lunatics. But we'll figure that out over the next 6 months.
Penny, were you instrumental in getting this so concentrated down to this chart?
Yes, that's part of the work I do with executives and their directors on the S.
Okay.
Big time, and Evelyn helps too.
Basically, this is a distillation of a mission on one page.
You got it. And then how's it going to be measured? Comes in after it.
Right.
But
I just want to make 2 comments about
Yeah.
something earlier when we were talking about the gig, and so what was great about your day, which of course is a wonderful way to start.
yes,
But also, when something bad happens, is, well, what is the good thing that, okay, you bitch and moan because this happened, well, what did you learn from that? How can you make that better next time? So
Yes.
It's not ignoring the bad things that happen, but it's like using them for good. And I
You-
noticed when you did that exercise, what we do, when I was a manager, if people came to me that worked for me and they said, I just screwed up, I did this, whatever, I was much nicer to them than I am to myself.
okay.
Because it was always like, don't worry about that, let's focus on the goal, like, what can we do, okay, this happened, we can't change that, but what can we do now to still meet our goal?
hmm You hit 2 things for me. Whenever I'm meeting somebody I haven't seen for a while, that's the first thing I say, hey, what are a couple of good things you've done that we could put in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or something? So what are a couple of things? And that's the first thing they're like, what? In that same light, I'm always prepared when I'm meeting someone that I haven't seen I'm prepared to tell them 3 good things that I've seen that I've been able to accomplish. Changes the whole relationship in the dialogue, night and day. The second thing, and we'll go back to the hospital world, on discharge. Not only am I going to ask for the 3 actions on discharge, but watch the other thing I want to do, and I want to do this with a hotel guest. I want to do this with any customer walking out of a store. Tell me 3 things that were good about the experience that you just had in this restaurant. Tell me 3 good things that you had as the experience you spent 2 days at this hotel. Tell me 3 things that you had about the flight that you just took that landed here at. Now, why do I want to do that with somebody that is a part of a customer, client, or guest, a patient? Don't matter. Why do I want to do that?
To embed the memory in their mind.
There's the memory I want them to remember and talk about. When they leave, I want them talking about those three things when they meet their next contact. Because if I don't, by law of some unknown, what are they going to talk about? The three bad things that happen first. So I want to plant in their head as they're doing that, so that when they get in a car, they go see that next person and they say, how was your stay at the hotel? I want that hardwired into boom, boom, boom. Those are the first three things I want to talk about at bingo or at wherever else they're going in their social network. And so thank you for prompting that, because that's how... Your seats, we got... All right, so I got three more things to go through with you, and then one more example, but let me just take you through what this is going to be. We're going to talk about reactive, proactive, and what the differences are. Something I call process leadership. How do you manage the silos and break down what the barriers are? Something that I've learned many, many years ago that I just carry with me all the time when I'm looking and listening to conversations around people in terms of what I call RPAF, and I'll talk to what those are. And then how do you get frontline workers to really take everything we've been talking about today and really engage them in using their enthusiasm, their energies and creativities to making the miracles or the real things happen. So those are the four pieces we're going to cover now. And the first one I want to take you through is what I call the difference between reactive, proactive. And so if I started to get you to think about how you go about experiencing life and how you go about experiencing the different things you work with or companies or orgs that you deal with, what I'm always trying to assess is, are they in a reactive or a proactive way? Meaning in how they're going about bringing solutions to problems or decisions that need to be made. And it goes back to our brain-to-brain communication. So when I'm talking in an organization, this is what I call our going out of business strategy, which is people don't really know what the requirements are. The big S is not clearly spelled out to them. They don't know what the organization's primary goals are and how they're trying to achieve it. Those requirements are not clear to the customers and their services, so they can't connect to what their company is really all about and what they're trying to deal with. Is the decision-making process more focused on reacting to problems or trying to anticipate and be proactive or preventing problems? Is there a tolerance that basically says, you know, people are human, well, therefore we'll all have errors, and so we'll accept the ones that come and we'll just build service departments? So I'm talking to a CIO in an organization in a retail chain, and they've got 35 people that do nothing but handle customer complaints. That's clearly a reactive org. We'll handle the customer complaints as opposed to what?
Train people in customer service.
You know, how do you, it's a topic. Evelyn just had an experience, and it's like, okay, she's got a GE appliance, it's 3 years old, and it breaks. So she wants customer service now. Clearly reactive, because here's what happens, right? Well, let me distinguish before, and then I'll tell you why I'm listening to this. I'm like, this is like... And people don't know what the cost of the failures are. So when something doesn't work, they don't get what the impact is, and therefore they keep making the same dumb mistakes over and over again. Now, I learned this way back in the 70s. I was a new person in a finance department, and Phil Crosby was meeting with our chief financial officer, telling him IBM's quality is starting to go down the tubes. And it was at a time when we just shut down the banking system for the city of Chicago for 3 days, which did not get us a lot of nice headlines. And so you shut down a banking system for 3 days, and the senior executives are going to do something about it. And so I was a new person in the department, and I got to go to spend a week in Florida with this man, Phil Crosby, who I didn't know at the time who really this guy was until I went to his living room and got invited to go to his house for dinner. Since I was at IBM, I got to go to his house for dinner. And there he is with the premier of Japan and with Dwight Eisenhower and with rockets and missiles and stuff like that that we were shooting off of Cape Kennedy at that time.
Names?
Phil Crosby, say again?
Are there any names that were there?
I've lost your question.
Joking. Dwight Eisenhower.
Okay, so anyway, so these were the people that were in his living room on pictures, and I'm like, wow, who is this guy? And he was the guy that wrote this book, Quality is Free. And that became a multi-million-dollar bestseller, and so from there, Quality is Free. And it's a I don't know if any of you have heard of it. All right? Basically what he was saying, the net of the book was real simple. To improve the quality of your organization, you need to move from this over to here, and you can actually build better quality products by doing this and for less cost. And at that time, that was, I mean, our CFO in the company at first said, this is insane. This can't possibly be. You can't make things better and not do it for less money. So I got the job that turned out to be a 5-year job, but I got the initial job to go out and either cost this out or cost this out and determine which was a better way to operate. And because of this piece, knowing what the cost of failures were and knowing what the cost of failures were, this RPAF, Required Prevention Appraisal Failure, and I'm going to go over that again. Once I started diving into those elements of our cost structure, I realized that 35% of IBM's cost was all associated with fixing failures, which was insane. When you think an organization could spend a third of its resources on fixing problems as opposed to preventing them. So that got me a certain level of religion when I began to look at the numbers, and I had to go back and present this to the IBM presidents, and I had to present the data, and I had to go back to, I mean, it was a long process to get them to finally buy into the numbers before they killed me. It was basically, we are not going to make it in the Japanese computer manufacturing. So we had started to go from number 1 in Japan to number 4, and we were following the pathways of steel, technology and radios, televisions. We were going right down the same tubes that they were in. So I got to go spend a bunch of time over in Japan trying to see, okay, what were they doing in Japan that we could bring over to here? And what they were basically doing, which was insane to us as being U.S. people, they were listening to Phil Crosby, a guy by the name of Ed Deming, who we sent them after World War II, and a guy by the name of Joseph Duran. All American people that basically were cast aside by American businesses, and our Congress sent them over to Japan after World War II to go help them fix their quality problems. If this isn't dumb, I don't know what is. And so I got to go spend time in Japan and see what they were doing, and it was just one of the great honors in my life that I always remember. I was going to do a presentation, and the president of IBM Japan, he's got an auditorium. There's got to be over 1,000 people in this auditorium. And he introduces to me, and he says, and Hitachi has got Japan, and this guy, but IBM's got Tony Datino. And the whole place just got up and applauded and welcomed me. And then there's this guy sitting in the front row, and he's sleeping through half of my presentation. And the host of it came over to me and said, I just want you to know, he heard you were going to be here. He worked all night, but he wanted to see you. So it was an honor to him to be in your presence. And I'm like, okay. Wow, you can go to sleep now if you'd like. As long as you tell me it's an honor to be in my presence, I'll be okay with your napping. But that was the experience that really lit me into being a total whack job for what the differences were in this, and really diving into the guts of how any organization makes its decisions on a day-to-day basis. And so what I'd like to do is have you do just an exercise and think about an organization that you've been a part of sometime in your life, and looking at these characteristics. So now we're going to make sure we know what our requirements are, and everybody in the org knows what they are. So no different than everybody understands what we're trying to do. We know what those requirements are. The map of the thing on the clinical excellence and things. We're going to make decisions to prevent problems as opposed to fix them after the fact. We're going to have a standard where we have metrics in place, even then at the frontline level, so they could immediately get feedback that knows when they're off track. And we're going to know what the cost of our bad decisions are, because we're going to measure them so that we can come back and impact. So here's an exercise I'd like you to do at a table level. Just think about an organization that you're a part of or you work with. And I'd like you to tell me, from what you've experienced in that organization or a company that you've dealt with or whatever, do you think that they've operated more over here where they're being reactive and, you know what, as errors come up, they're going to throw resources at it? Or do you think you deal with people where they realize they need to drive errors down, but they're trying to do it by investing in their people and investing in changing the way work gets done? And then I'll share with you just this week's experience we had with GE Appliances, and it drove me up the wall. So, tell me, in the companies or orgs that you've dealt with, do you think they're more here? Do you think they're kind of half and half? Or do you think they're over here? And give me one example as to why you feel that way. So have a table conversation, get together. This is either a company you've worked with or somebody you've dealt with. This is wonderful, but far too big for me. It has my pages the way I love them, but this is too big for me to carry. So if you can bring this back, don't worry about it.
No, I'll
If you
trade
can-
it in.
Okay. But it was a perfect gift, but the wrong size. But let me tell you what you did well, but it was too big, because I don't carry.
No,
I love the fact that I don't like this stuff. Like, well, this is a reference.
tell me what-
I liked it
Yeah, that's
that you
what
could
I
see
like, the block.
all the pages.
I do
So when I look at my calendar, I look this way, and I can see all the dates, and I can do it by month. I don't need all this stuff.
No, no, okay.
It can be a very simple, basic, just give me those blocks.
But that's the reason why they were hired. It was true. There was a, if you went into Asian stores, there was that kind of like, you had to have a smile, an attitude, but everything was crisis management. There was no, we went over to, they sent us to Germany to learn how to pull up clothes, basically. So we got back. That's all we knew.
So you working in retail, you were working.
I was 20 years old, making $14 an hour, like 2000, doing retail. And this is how the whole store was, you know, in 6th Avenue, all their opening stores were making higher than regular. And it was so reactive because what I was going to say is,
Good to hear.
they didn't teach us really anything. They just expected us to kind of get it. Like, they had these 7 pillars.
There we
this is
go.
like
Keep going.
H&M, all this other stuff.
You want gum?
No, no, I'm good. Oh, I went back to get a cup.
Management position right before we left Germany. There were a few incidents, and the owner of H&M, the CEO, whatever, was there at this meeting with us, and you know, he was really good. He was like,
Your life today. What do we have over here?
All we did was what? All we did was yell at you.
Dell, okay, listen to this now. Dell Computer, far on the left side, meaning they're going to give you problems and then recover and service it after. They won't even recover?
They just like, they keep on torturing you and torturing you and torturing you. Yeah,
Who is
it's just
this?
like the most nightmarish experience I've ever had.
Young
It's
lady,
been
who is
lasting
this?
8 months.
Dell Computer. I've heard that about Dell, but I didn't realize they were so reactive.
Oh, they're so awful.
But they've made so much money being so awful.
It's unbelievable that they're still in business because it sounds like, if you go on the internet, it sounds like nobody is having a good experience with them anymore.
I would just want to give an alternative to that is Lenovo. I have a Lenovo laptop. I had a problem with it. I called them expecting a horror show. I got a human being on the line within a minute and a half. They walked me through the whole thing, and within 5 minutes, everything resolved. Boom, done. I was amazed.
Meanwhile, with Dell Computer, they keep on transferring you back and forth within units, and because they can't answer your question, they hang up on you.
All reactive. You're right, far left. Over to here.
My crisis management was H&M. I was one of H&M's first employees in 2000 in America, and we went to Germany supposedly for this, you know, professional development, but all they taught us was how to fold clothes in like cash register. So when we came back to America, we were still like, we didn't know what we were doing, and you had all these teenagers running these different stores, Fifth Avenue, and I remember like all the time things were breaking, all the time things were going wrong. People were bringing back orders by a ton. You know, like clothing orders because we were putting the wrong price tags on them.
Okay.
Selling different things. What I would say is the organization I'm with now, Strive International, they're very proactive leadership. We have 2 scholarships for people that work with us. They invest in us going into back to school. Here is my professional development, and that kind of keeps us proactive.
Got it.
Versus dealing with things afterwards.
Excellent. That's where organizations need to be going if they're going to survive. But it takes leadership that sees that and wants to go there. What do we have here?
For proactive, we have Parker Warby, the glasses people, who really innovated and created a whole new way of delivering glasses, good-looking, well-designed
What,
glasses
I-
for less money to.
I've never heard of them. Who are they?
When you go to
These are
Grand
Parker
Central,
Warby.
they have
Yes.
a store there, go in there.
Okay.
These are Parker
Oh,
Warby.
wow. Are they expensive? Are they expensive?
They're less expensive.
Are you kidding? What? Okay, the name of this company?
Warby.
P-A-R-K?
Warby Parker.
Go to Grand
Okay,
Central to their
go there. Park, okay, we got two more people making frowns. Warby, W-A-R-B-Y, Parker, P-A-R-K-E-R.
They're amazing.
Warby.
They have brick and mortar stores, and you can also go check them out online.
These are
They'll
the
send
most
you,
expensive.
they did it while they were in business school at Wharton.
This is unbelievable.
They found out that the key was to take away the middleman, because all glasses are actually made by 3 companies.
They're all over the United States?
They're online, so it's available.
Okay,
It's-
but then, wait, if they're online, how do you get on your prescription?
They'll send it to you for free.
They send you 5 glass frames. You could pick out 5 glass frames that you like if you do it online. They send them to you for free. You try them on, you decide the ones you want, you send it back to them with your prescription, and they send it back.
But they have in-person stores as well.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
You're all set, Tony.
This is unbelievable.
I've changed from the most.
I gotta get new, I just went to the eye doctor last week. I gotta get a new pair of glasses. I was gonna go to Costco, but this is, hey, I got it, Warby Parker, okay.
Young, really helpful people, really
I
helpful.
love
You'll
it.
pick out a really hip frame.
So I upgraded mine to trendy last time.
What do we got over here? Reactive Proactive Organization.
So, I was basically telling a story, shared a story about Macy's, and where reactive was more of a long story than it was classified to reactive to proactive. We started out as changing from reactive to proactive and actually went the reverse.
Whoa, wow.
So I'll tell you the story. And it stemmed from, excessive returns and allowing associates to make the end decision because they're at the front line, so a customer brings something back and it's out of policy. Everybody wants a black and white policy when at the end of the day, just do the right thing. Do the right thing for the company and for the customer.
Okay.
And so we went out there with that mantra, training all around it, tried it on for size kind of thing, and then senior management took a look at, somebody from finance brought up the expense and said, well, look at what your program is costing the company, when in essence, can you measure what it would have been?
Oh, on the other
Yeah.
sookie, and that's the
what
problem.
People are spending once we took back that
Yeah.
initial, that they felt that like, I use the example of a cooking pot with a lid, and it was sent online without the lid. So the customer came in, and we wouldn't take it back because there was no lid, but that's why she was bringing it. So it's just,
Oh,
convoluted.
wow.
So.
Boy, when you get into the reactive stuff, it gets convoluted. And boy, and what are the impacts? You see, that's one of the problems with that. So what are your impacts when you're doing that? But a lot of times the impacts are not immediately noticeable, but they sure bite you in the butt later on. What do we have over here?
Half and half, and each will share the prices.
All right,
We work for the same company, so we're gonna
got that, okay.
Okay, so I said crisis management because a lot of times, when something goes wrong or when we're held to the fire, that's when senior leaders seem to be proactive because now it's something we have to do.
Yes.
As opposed to if you know that there's a fire or potential storm brewing, you don't make the proper preparations.
And I said proactive leadership because as a standalone hospital for many years, it's always known, our leader had insight and vision to know that if we cannot stand alone by ourselves, we have to partner with a large network, and now we're part of Hackensack Meridian,
Okay.
and now we keep our hospital, our community hospital open because we're attached to that strong entity. So I say strong leadership, but yet we still have some issues, crisis management.
And, I don't know if I'll see the day in my lifetime where we eliminate the crises, because as much as I've studied and worked, it is still hard to believe for me. I studied this and started on this work in 1979, so I'm getting pretty old in this stuff, and I still see too many of our American businesses that are still running so far to the left. And I'll give you a couple of clues as you live your life as to how to be able to test this. So first of all, let me talk about 2 experiences that Evelyn has had. One with LG refrigerator. You go look at all this refrigerator stuff and you look at consumers and they're all terrific, right? And it's all wonderful. With the exception of, God help you if the refrigerator breaks, the servicing you're going to get on that is going to take you forever. So you want to share your servicing experience. Only you can do that as well.
I came back from a trip and my refrigerator was off. Everything was defrosted in the freezer. So I threw everything out, had to account, said I needed a new compressor, but by the way, you're under warranty. It's a very expensive part, so I called LG. Well, you have to pay for an extended warranty and then we'll send somebody. Well, long story short, this was during the summer. 6 weeks later, I was on the phone with their executive office in Korea, ready to kill them. And they because they canceled my appointment, because they'd make an appointment and then they'd cancel it and say, oh no, well, it's too expensive, we can't cover this under the warranty. So they wouldn't pay the people that they were making an appointment to come after. So finally, they decided, their executive team, after 6 weeks during the summer with no refrigerator, they finally sent somebody to fix it and covered it under the warranty. But it was a nightmare. And hours on
LG. Yeah.
They make very good TVs, but you would never want to buy their refrigerator.
All right. So off we go.
And nobody, and this is brand new, this is like a year old. So now it's 2 years later, and my brand new oven goes out. It doesn't go out, actually, it just doesn't go off.
So you heat your food up and
it goes on and it stays on, so, in order to turn it off after I'm finished using it, I run out to the garage and turn the circuit breakers, and we're fine.
Is that LG also?
no, this is now GE.
Oh my God.
So anyway, I'm going to be home for a couple of weeks. I call them and make an appointment. I tell them what's wrong. I've done all my research and I know what I need to fix. Yeah. Now you're going to send somebody, going to charge me $110 to come out to my house, and they're going to bring the part, right? Yes. The guy comes, has no clue, no part, doesn't understand, explain to him over and over, can't believe what's happening. So he says, okay, I guess I'm going to have to call the engineer. Nobody knows what's happening. Well, I guess we're going to have to change your memory board. So I said, fine, which I've known now for months. So a week later, he comes back, puts in the piece, and it does work. And I get a call from customer service. How was the guy? He's great. Would you want to know what I'm doing? Well, no, that's all the questions I have. but I want to tell you how I really feel about this. It's a 3-year-old oven. My last oven I had for like 30 years. My last refrigerator I had for 25 years, right? But I said, it shouldn't break after 3 years. And by the way, when I call and tell you what's wrong with it, and you tell me you're going to send somebody with a part, and they show up, now I've taken 2 days off from work. I've had to wait here for you. The guy, when he came, was very friendly. He was nice. Didn't have a clue what he was doing. But unfortunately, I'm too old. They just don't make things like they used to.
So now, reactive, all the way reactive.
I just want to say one
Yeah.
thing, Tony. It's very interesting to me. If you listen to the phone surveys after a service, they orient the questions in such a way that
That's what
they
you said.
get a positive.
Yeah.
And then
She
they
said
use
that.
Oh,
She said the questions are loaded. What good is this feedback? But now here's the last piece. They left the, what do you call it? They left the part for her to get rid of. Like, wouldn't you think you'd take that part and bring it back to an engineer, and you got all these different circuits, wouldn't somebody want to know what circuit is broken? So they say, hey, if 50 customers have got this same problem, couldn't we kind of redesign what this part is? They don't have a clue. There's got to be about 20 different circuits in this darn board. There's no circle back to root prevention at all. It's all going to be, let's just keep throwing service guys out there, and let's keep charging the customers for it, and let them take Tuesday. Who cares if they take 2 days off from work?
Just to add to that, I had a very similar experience with our new, less than a year old refrigerator. And I talked to a zillion people, and I talked to everybody said, there is no good refrigerator unless you go really, really high end. And what the decision is which company has the best service.
There you go.
So I went with Frigidaire because I did all the research and they had the best service. It was better than your experience, but it was still problematic. But that's the way you had to make the decision.
Why?
Because none of them were good. Isn't that horrible?
That's
This-
not such a high tech, I don't
This is real. I'm with you. Like we got. So I'm down in Cape Canaveral, where I live, I can watch these rockets go off and come back and land on a platform, and we can't get a refrigerator to work, an oven to work. Are you kidding me or what? But we can get rockets to go up and land on a platform.
One of the biggest things I always talk about with crisis management, now that I see conceptually what you guys are saying, I'm thinking of cars. For some reason, in the last 15 years or so, it's been great to tell people that we have a warranty to cover everything that's going to break within their first 5 years.
Isn't that great?
And it's weird because I'd rather you tell me you don't need a warranty or that
There you go.
the car will last 5
Right.
years or
I just
10 years because it's like that's the first thing they sell you on. They're like, hey, here's a new car, but you're going to want a
There you
10-year
go.
warranty because everything's going to break on this bad.
There you go.
I just bought a new car and I went to pick it up and I wanted to pay them for it and they're trying to sell me a lease and they're trying to sell me all these warranties. And finally I looked at the guy and I said, Eddie says you really need it. He takes out this beautiful diagram and shows me everything that can go wrong with it. And I said, please cancel my order. He says, what do you mean? I said, if it's going to break, I don't want it. And he says, well, no, I'm not saying that. I said, no, you just told me that. I said, I no longer want the car, and I got up to walk out. No, sit down.
My friend was buying, and it's funny because the car.
Now, my 98 Honda Accord.
Exactly, will still
With
be.
170,000 miles is still being driven by my niece in Connecticut.
Exactly, and those things had no warranties.
And
my
they're
friend,
it's 20 years old.
and the bad thing it was a Ford, right? So I don't know if anybody ever heard of the other name, Fix or Repair Daily. Ford. So that just emphasized, the whole like buying a new car. It's like you're going in to buy something that's already broken, and you're accepting this. Like you're literally saying, hey, I'm going to take this car and hopefully I make it through 5 years, and then it's on me.
You just hit a bullseye for me. Just to share quickly, I can go on again. I'm an IBM Armonk, and at the time our chairman wanted us to bring our customers and vendors in. And there's Ford executives that are sitting in this big conference room up in IBM Armonk, and I'm sitting next to one of them. And it was at that time where Ford was running a commercial. We have 37 inspectors that check every car before it gets to you. And I was sitting next to this Ford executive of quality, and I said, do you understand the message that you're giving to the American consumer? That your employees are so bad that you need to have 37 people checking their work. That ad I never got to see it again. It was pulled off immediately the next day, checking the checkers. Now, in the hospital world, you people kill people. So you get Washington politicians, they're going to send checkers on. You got Joint Commission and CMS commissions, and there's this, I don't know how many more commissions you guys get to come visit with you, but you got commission after commission after commission. And so what is happening in our hospital world is you're clearly living over here right now, because each time you get one of those checkers to come in, you've mobilized your resource not to take care of patients, but to figure out where the errors are. Which is then causing in the hospital world a major crossover to how can we afford to do that when we keep trying to have to pour more resource on it. So if any of you have been driven crazy, if you've been into a doctor's office or a hospital or outpatient for surgery, how many times are you going to have to give your name, your rank, and your serial number? Is at least 4. And it's because of they're operating. Oh,
Just move the mouse.
just move the mouse.
Yeah, you should be fine.
Move the mouse. Hey, thank you. Hey. So how many times are we going to every time you do those checkers and testers, it's chewing up productivity. And that's where people lose their thinking in terms of it. And so I think you've come up with some really good examples. And unfortunately, I've been at this for now over 30 years, and I still see a GE or an LG we're still living with a mentality in our country that says, let it break and we'll figure out how to fix it later. But the problem is if you're in a competitive world where your competition has figured out how to do it here, after 30 plus years of it, this works. This works. But how do you get people that are so accustomed to firefighting and having customer recovery and customer services, like, why do you need all this customer service and repair? My God, what kind of junk are you having? And even to go out and buy a car or an appliance, anything you're going to buy that's got any parts in it, they're going to follow that right up with, let me give you a service contract. Now, one other thing that I'll close down with, and in a lot of the organizations I work with, I'll ask what leaders, and I'll call them managers, what managers get promoted or get recognized and rewarded? Now, I want you to think about that. Who gets recognized in most organizations and who gets the rewards and gets the, we're going to bring them in front of a whole group of a meeting, whatever. Do they get, I call them the firefighters, they just put out a fire, or I call Smokey the Bear, he too can prevent a fire. And 9 out of 10 organizations said the firefighters, that's an adrenaline rush, and my God, they get all the recognition, promotions and rewards because they can put out fires better than anybody else. And I'm saying, stupid.
Part of that is driven too by, quarterly earnings and the push constantly for, so they're just, they want immediate results. They don't care the long-term impact.
Not at all. And by the way, when you get CEOs that are on the last 18 months of their, they could care less about doing maintenance or things that are going to be proactive in the future because I'm going to grab the money and run. And I have seen that happen more. I would hope Congress does more on clawbacks where they pull those bonuses back that people get, because I've seen too many cases. And unfortunately, we have David sitting here, one, and had a chairman that I had the pleasure, who was just cutting stuff out that eventually became problems in the Bronx and the Queens and several other communities here in Manhattan, because he was taking the money and run on his last couple of years going out the door. So what I'm looking for in an organization, do I have short-term players? Do I have long-term players? Do I have people that are looking for the future and leaving something behind that has a legacy, or am I looking to just dump and run? I'll pick on Jack Welch. He got all kinds of credit and wonderful. I think he left Jeffrey Immelt with the biggest bunch of turds that anybody could have possibly left him.
And he's also responsible for the short-term thinking because of what he did with the, takeovers.
All the time. And yet he got rewarded for doing what? I can't compute with that stuff. I just, and I don't want to take on Jack Welch. I'm sorry. All right. Now, the next thing I look at in organizations, and this is a fun thing, and by the way, this is just in with people. You can look at any trying to bring a change. So we've talked about change in individuals and change in organizational structure, a change in individual lives, right? Change in relationships that are kind of bouncing, right? The way people think that they're going to bring about change in things and even within relationships is let's go buy something. We'll go buy a new house, or we'll go buy a new car, or we'll go buy a new swimming pool, or we'll go buy something that I call infrastructure. In a new office or building, we'll give people new offices. We'll give them a new computer. We'll give them some new chairs. We'll give them a nice... and what we'll do is then we're going to figure out how to change the way they work, and then we'll ask them to change behavior in the course of it. And what we'll do is expect them through this process to like it. Now, how many of you would like getting stuffed for how you do a piece of work, and they gave you a new tool to do it, and you don't like the tool and don't like the change they're going to make in your process, and you're going to be happy about it? So what I've learned over time, if you can engage frontline people to tell you what their thoughts and feelings are about the way they're doing their work, they will demand the infrastructure that will keep this engaged. And it's just a flip in the sequence. And I cannot tell you, I'm going to keep picking hospitals, how many hospitals today are dropping tons of money on computer systems and changing the way people are having to do their work, and their morale is going into the tank. I don't know when we ever learn anymore. I used to think, when will we ever learn? I don't know if it's ever. I certainly have given up on it in my lifetime. So what does a leader, if we talk about leaders and managing leadership emotions and managing the emotions of an organization, what leaders really need to do to distinguish between what we call a process, the big picture, an activity, a piece of work, and a task, I'm down into the details. We're going to cover those a little bit more. And how do they relate the activities to the big picture to make sure we're getting the right outcomes? That's our S. A leader in moving here has to support action plans that frontline makes suggestions and recommendations from. And last but not least, in the hospital world, the leader's got to go meet with the patients and the doctors and find out what's really going on. But here's what's amazing to me. I find too many people in leadership positions that don't recognize two things. Number one, if you've got something down here with a jagged edge on it, and it's all gooked up, what happens to the whole mechanism? The whole system gets clogged. I see it with customers. And again, we can pick on hotels, we can pick on restaurants, we can pick on GE now, we can pick on LG, we can pick. It's like, whoa, does anybody ever figure out from the bottom what's the real world really about? The second thing that's amazing is when an executive speaks, all of a sudden it starts churning all the wheels. So one spin here at the top sends the whole organization into a state of crises, panic, confusion. What are they really asking? Blanks, all the things that we've talked about today. So what is the process? When I first did this work back in the 80s, it was amazing because we were trying to do a presentation for the IBM Board of Directors, and we didn't have a definition of a process, so we created one. We said, okay, it's real simple. A process is going to be the organization of people. So how do we organize people in departments? We're going to give them some procedures to follow. We'll give them some equipment, machines to utilize in getting that done. And then we'll give them some supplies and work materials to make that all happen. And we string that into what we call work activities. And the key about it is how we sequence it to produce a specified end result. So this is what I started on in the late 70s, all through the 80s, until I met this guy Buzan, and I started understanding this TEFCAS model. And I said, okay, wait a minute. One of the biggest problems we had in a lot of our process improvement work and our process innovation, in the work that I was doing with Six Sigma and the work I did with the Baldrige Award, was to get people, first of all, at the leadership level, to have a clear definition of the end result. So I would go around with people and say, okay, we've got this string of people doing a piece of work. What's the end result? And I always love this, especially here when I'm in New York City. I love walking through the streets in New York City, and you see these camera shoots, and you see all these guys with the cameras, and they're pulling off all their pictures and cameras, and half of these people, half the time, are just standing around doing nothing. And I'm like, does everybody on the crew clearly understand what the end result is of what we're trying to do? Has somebody taken that clearly and defined it for them? And then has each person in the string got a clear picture of what that is and how their piece results to it? Which to me sometimes explains why some of these movies that sometimes win the Academy Awards are produced for like $1 million because somebody's figured it out. It takes discipline, it takes a bit of work, but do we know? And yet I've listened to some executives and some people talk about, well, I'll know it when I see it. How many C's are you going to have before you know it? And so, again, one of the things I've learned, I've worked with real estate agents. It's interesting we're doing this here today. I get real estate agents to take a customer and or potential buyer, and I just get them to do a quick, that spoke exercise we do? I just say, get a person to give you some quick spokes on what they're looking for in a house. And what are the critical elements that they must have. So do this, hand it back to the couple, and say, is this what you're looking for? And 50% of the times, this will change. So we're still sitting in the office. No reason to go start running around, driving around, looking at houses if you haven't got this pictured out. So with real estate people that I've worked with that really have captured this, their real estate sales almost double. Because they got more time to sell than they do to run around in their car. What's the end result of all this going to be? Next, aha, big light bulb. All the people working in the enterprise are connected to a bigger picture. So I picked on the ED department this morning, and I pick on different departments. Do you understand the string of work and how it gets done? Does a manufacturer of a car understand from engineering what happens when it gets shipped and what happens when you start driving it when it has to come back to service? Does everybody in an organization understand that one person's output is another person's input, and one person's output is another person's input, and we're all playing this game together? So when you call your Dell person up, hey, not my job. Throw the ball over the fence and give it to somebody else. And so we have what we call silos. So how do you mush these silos together? Because the bottom line is, until everybody's honing in on the big picture and everybody's honing in on the key result, you're going to sub-optimize your organization all the time, because each function is going to have their own budget. And what they're going to do, they have their own performance metrics, and what's going to happen is they are all trying to sub-optimize their metrics. And as they're trying to can we help you?
We were hoping we could have a computer set up for a presentation after this. What time are you?
We're going to be done by 4:30 and out of here by 4:30.
Wonderful. We will be back at 4:30.
Okay. And so how do you get people who are used to sub-optimizing to focus on the big picture when they're concerned about their immediate budgets? And who cares if I blow somebody up down the street? Who cares? Not my department. Which brings us to that RPAF thing I told you about. So the first thing I learned from Phil Crosby was what you need as a finance guy. So how did I get dragged into this thing? Was initially because everybody laughed. You got the short straw. You got stuck. They gave me a Boy Scout Medal of Honor for being so proactive about this stuff. But the first thing I learned is that any piece of work that a person does needs to be broken up into 4 components. If we're going to understand the difference between a reactive and a proactive organization, we need to understand where the cost is being. The first reason is, if we were in a perfect world, so I always tell people, put on your perfect world hat, and nobody makes mistakes. Everybody does exactly what they're supposed to do. What would be the work actions that would be absolutely essential for people to take place in that perfect world? Those would be required steps. Now, in the real world, we make mistakes. So now I go from top to bottom. And I say, in a real world that we live in, people make mistakes, and now we have to find ways to fix and recover and repair those mistakes. This stuff from the customer service unit, the phone calls and all those extra people and all that, this guy coming for the servicing that has to come back and forth twice. Well, who cares about the customer? But by the way, this guy is driving back and forth on 2 occasions, taking hours to do that. He must be getting paid for those hours driving the truck. So what are we spending within an organization on failure-related work actions? And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So what we know is, and especially now we'll go pick on hospitals and sometimes hotels, what we know is people are going to make mistakes. So what we're going to do is we're going to have what we call appraisal tasks. We're going to interject appraisals, meaning people are going to value the work that's done, and they're going to check it to see if it was done well or if it was done poorly. So in your world, it's 4 checkers for a bracelet or for a name or something. So we're going to appraise it 4 times. But each time you do an appraisal, what's going to happen? You're spending time. And one of the things my dad always taught me, Anthony, is time is money. Okay, so we're spending time checking and testing and verifying to see if something's done well. Now, if we want to move to a proactive world, we want to take that circuit board and we want to go back to do root cause. Now we're going to start moving into, we're going to be preventing what in the future? Failures. So now we're in a mode where the decision-making process is putting resource into prevention, and therefore, as the resource goes into prevention, that is going to have a corresponding reduction in failure. So when I started doing this work, the big 3 consultants were saying is for every hour you can spend on prevention, you can save 10 hours of failure. And that's what I was asked to go verify. Because our CFO thought this was, as he used to call it, snake oil. And so his take was, you're telling me that if I spend an hour of prevention, I can save 10 hours of failure? Tony, you're going to go prove that. And I want you to come back and report to me, because I'm not buying what these three guys are selling, and that's just not the way it works. So I got to go out and do 12 different studies. And when I was done with those 12 studies, here's what I found out. Not only could you get 10 to 1, but if you could get people to think across their silos and get them out of the my department syndrome, not only could you get 10 to 1, you could get 20 to 1. Now, what do I mean by 20 to 1? If I could get a person back here to understand the impact that they're doing over here, and even take, this was insane when we first did this, take resource from here and move it back here to prevent the errors from coming through the flow, not only could we reduce our costs by a factor of 10 plus, but we could go through this whole cycle in about a third less time. Which is where the Sigma stuff came from, is not only can you reduce cycle time, but you get your cost factors down, and that's what became the craze of Six Sigma. But what the craze of Six Sigma lost was the cultural changes that we were trying to make in the thinking of managers who operated in silos. And Sigma never did that. What Sigma came along and did is took the principles. So how did that all happen? I had done some work, and this is, there's nobody else alive that can verify this story. I'm getting old. All right? Here's what happened. My boss at the time was the CFO. Our chairman wanted to reduce our reporting time to Wall Street by 2 days. So he gives me the job. He says, Tony, what you got to do is work with the finance people, and you got to figure out how to cut our reporting to Wall Street by 2 days. We good? So it required me to take a bunch of people in the accounting groups and lay out their work activities on how do we get something to Wall Street that starts all the way back over here with the consolidation that's coming in from all over the world. And so we took this apart piece by piece, and we began to realize that if we could get these finance people to get out of their silos and we could connect them across the whole picture to the reporting of quarterly results, my boss at the time said to this guy over here, you're going to take a head count and you're going to put it back over to here. And we're going to see if the errors that are coming through that are causing the delay in the reporting, and we're going to clean that up, because here's what was happening. They would have a cycle time. They'd had to get it out. So they'd get their reporting done, and I'd call it, they'd throw it over the fence. Now, when they throw it over the fence, guess what they were throwing over the fence with it? Errors. Now, where were the errors coming from? Back here. Who was getting caught with the errors? Over here. So they'd fix some, and they had a cycle they had to get through with a deadline of a closing. And what would they do? Throw it over the fence. Now, they'd throw some of their errors over the fence along with some of their errors over the fence. So now you got this guy catching 3 errors, including their own. And now you've got a massive amount of what they call in the accounting world called miscodes. Meaning there are records in the books that they can't find a place to put on the financial statements. And so you get away with that until you get to year end. When you get to year end, you got to clean up all the miscodes. So now you got people working all kinds of overtime, and they're going like absolutely nuts. They're just dropping stuff in. I won't give you the consequences that was, but it was not ugly. It was very, we almost came to the point where Price Waterhouse was not going to certify our statements. Now, how would that make Wall Street feel about IBM? Because we just kept throwing it over the fence. So the boss at the time told this guy, now again, this string was about 8 long, so I'm giving you the shortcut here. But the boss eventually said, you're going to take some people from here and you're going to drop them all the way back here. So we took our best people that were great at fixing miscodes, and we stuck them back there. And guess what we were able to do? Clean up a lot of the junk right here. So the junk wasn't getting thrown over the fence, and it wasn't getting thrown over the fence. And that's where we started to look at this and say, we could easily, in fact, we cut 3 days off the cycle. 3 days off the cycle. And we could do it with less headcount out here. So now we had better quality, we had faster productivity in getting through the efficiency of the cycle, and we could do it for less resource. So our chairman at the time says, I want you to bring this to our big time, we're going to have this big powwow with 100 different companies and customers and whatever, and we're going to bring what you've been doing with these finance people, and we're going to showcase this to our vendors and our customers. And I'm sitting next, so the IBM Vice President of Quality is presenting this stuff, and I'm sitting next to the Vice President of Quality for Motorola. So we show them all this stuff and how we've broken down the silos and how we're reducing our cycle. We had all these great metric charts and stuff like that. And I'm sitting next to this guy, and I didn't know an HP calculator from a hole in the wall, but he takes out this calculator, which I learned was an HP, and he starts, and he goes, he says, got it. We're going to call what you did Six Sigma. Six Sigma is closest to 0 defects. So we're going to, and we didn't know intellectual property at that time. This is in the early 80s, and we were just giving it away. I was up in front of thousands of people presenting this work in front of thousands of people at different societies and groups. Had no idea what intellectual property was, because what Acres was trying to do at the time was get our vendors and customers to understand what we were doing that was going to help us grow our market. Now we're going to talk about key words. We're going back to the communication exercise. But that's how Sigma came to pass. But as Sigma came to pass, we lost the disciplines of what we were trying to do in terms of end results, in terms of cycles, in terms of individual silos, in terms of bringing the solutions from the bottom up. And then Jack Welch gets a hold of it and starts driving it top down, and that's the end of that story for now. Now, I'm sorry? Motorola was the guy sitting next to me. And I'm working with engineers that they're talking. So here's what the guy in Motorola said, and he said this in the meeting. He said, our engineers have not eaten Crosby's dog food, they've not eaten Deming's dog food, and they haven't eaten Duran's dog food. But if we call this Six Sigma, it is going to be sexy enough for them that they'll eat this dog food. That's a true statement. So he was giving his Motorola engineers dog food. Now, what was the piece then that came behind that? Bossidy, who was at Allied that time, got to talk to his buddy at Motorola and says, I'm going to bring this to Allied. And it was Welch playing golf with the Allied CEO that eventually said, we're bringing this into GE. And it was Welch that made Sigma the big thing that it was. So it was funny one time because I got some word when I was still working at IBM, is that Welch was poking Gershon, who now took over IBM. And he was poking Gershon on the golf courses they played up in Connecticut. When are you going to come up with something, Six Sigma? And I said, somebody should have told Gershon, I'm working on your next program. Sigma came out of IBM. But nobody knew that because we never publicized this. Because what happened is we didn't have the behavioral change piece. What we had is the statistics, which dulled and bored the hell out of people. We had the analysis. These guys would go into these rooms and fill up flow charts, and it looked like as sexy as anything, but nothing would get changed. And so what we were doing is turning people off rather than turning them on. And again, this was in the mid-'80s, and I was in the middle of all this stuff, and it wasn't until I met Buzan in the late '80s when I said, darn it, I wish I would have known this stuff at the time, because we would have been able to bring the behavioral stuff into it. And that's when I left IBM, and I said, okay, I'm going to play my own sandbox, and I'm going to create the integration between what I call the behavioral piece and the process innovation pieces. I'm going to integrate those two, and people are going to just love it. And I'm going to show you one of my case studies and one of my stories. But you have got a story that, until I started working with Mike and Andrew and his team, this was a story I never told to people. It was like, did Al Gore invent the internet? It's like, did Tony D'Attino invent Six Sigma? But I started meeting with some people, and just having a cup of coffee, I would tell them where I got some of this background, and they would look at me like, why aren't you telling this story? Are you stupid or what?
But this kind of underscores what you guys started with, because you said that everything we knew about the brain is turning out to be wrong. Everything we knew about business is turning out to be wrong.
And we still are doing it wrong. That's what drives me crazy, and I'm saying, my goodness. But here's the problem. When an organization starts to go in crisis mode, emotionally, they'll revert back to what they know. And that's the real problem, because they'll go back to what they're more comfortable with. Now, what they're more comfortable with could be a total disaster. That's exactly how they go out of business. That's exactly how they do it. Because their emotions pull them right back to what they're comfortable with. Not going to take chances on some two lunatics that are going around doing what? And so off you go. And that, by the way, the hospitals are really killing themselves in this. And if they don't get some of this stuff figured out, you're going to see more and more hospitals close down. Now, their solution in the short term is just merge with bigger ones. But if they're not underneath the covers, really tearing up what's going on and how they're getting this done, you know, let me stop there. You can tell I have a few opinions, but it's on passion and wanting to make a difference. Okay, this is so grassroots. We bring in people on a grassroots level, and they've got to create a focus of thinking. They've got to create action plans. They've got to create metrics that show that they work. They've got to generate, why is this an ROI? And they've got to do the follow-up on making sure they deliver the results. So what Marshall and I have taken from you here today is we've taken the essence of a 3-day leadership workshop and 4 days of frontline workshops, and we've distilled what we have thought about it to be the most compelling lessons out of those 2 sessions and say, okay, if we wanted to get a group of people together and at least give them a showpiece of things that could make a difference to them immediately, and yet give them a picture, at least of, as Pat well said earlier, how does this all fit? It just certainly can't fit into a 1-day session. And so what the elements in those pieces are really entail some of these types of things in getting a culture within an organization to change those ingrained patterns to believe to put them into play. So you do that by starting with getting leaders to define their S. What are they looking for in their culture? What is their role in terms of making it happen? And do they buy in, real simple concept, do they buy into the concept that frontline people in an organization just may have the answers to their company's problems? And I cannot tell you how many frontline groups of people, hardworking men and women that do the grunt work on a day-to-day basis, come up with solutions that I'll see a CEO sitting in a room and saying, we couldn't have hired a consultant that could have come up with a suggestion like that without spending a couple of $1 million. And I hear that over and over again. I'm the ultimate, sometimes people call me Father Tony because I have the ultimate belief in people and what they can do. So here's a quick example. This was a team, again, I've been working in hospitals, so here's a life story. A group of people that covered admissions, case, ED, there's 5 different departments. Anyway, there's 5 different departments there. So we put these people in a room for 3 days. And we said, go figure it out. So the first thing they have to do is lay out what I call the matrix. We're going to exit from the patient's room. We're going to prepare the room for EVS. So there were EVS problems here, that rooms weren't getting cleaned out, so they had turnover. So they were keeping people in the ED because rooms weren't being cleaned fast enough. Complete the transfer of an order, get EVS to go in and clean the room. EVS updates the room and then cuts it open and puts it on the system and says the room is now available. I think there was another page in that, but I shortcutted this for today. So then we take one of those boxes. So we take just one. And this is where you build the ROI piece, the sustainable. We take one of these boxes and the team gets to pick one of these boxes that they think at the activity level they can improve within a 6-week period of time. Now, why is it important for people to improve something within 6 weeks? And I always remember reading the book, Gordon Bethune, Continental Airlines, talked about people laughed at me when I went around the country giving out $6 checks for the first changes we made when I became the CEO at Continental Airlines. And people laughed at them. Any of you read his book? Because he said, what I realized I needed to do within 3 months is do what nobody else did before me, which was to take a real change and implement it. Because if I did what everybody else said, which was to promise change, and didn't deliver it in a less than 3-month period of time, I was going to immediately be branded and labeled just like the predecessors before me. So therefore, I needed to demonstrate real change, and it didn't matter how big the change was, it mattered that there was a change. And then you needed to celebrate that change, so I went around the country and gave out these $6 checks on a personal level and thanked everybody that made that happen. And he got laughed at for that. The problem with that is he did the right thing from a brain point of view. He gave people a hope that said you could bring real change to an organization in a short period of time, which you can now do and use to what? Build on. He built the trust in the culture that said, we can do this. So here's what this team does. They take one of these things and they go do an analysis of it, and here's your RPAF. Now I want you to look at these columns. Where are they spending most of their time? You don't have to add them up. All you got to do is quickly look at them. Here's where they're spending most of their time, is on failure. Now, what did they have to do? First thing they had to do is define responsibilities. It was a war zone. They were one department was taking pictures of the other department, and they were passing that back to the bosses and letting them fight it out. I go down through the hallways doing my rounding one day, and they're screaming at one another, and patients are in the rooms. I get one where goes, Tony, come over here, we're going to show you. And so she pulls me into one of the break rooms they had for the nurses, and do you see what she's doing down there? And they're talking about an environmental services program. She's taking pictures of those rooms once the patients are discharged to show what we're not doing. And what were the nurses doing? Taking pictures of EV and what they weren't doing. That is a way to build teamwork. All right, so we defined responsibilities of who was going to do what. We got beds ready for department, and here's how we were going to measure. And here's what they were able to do. They had a goal of 45 minutes. They were at that time doing at 75. This is what they were wasting. That's, as a leader said, that's almost 2 FTEs, full-time equivalents. But here's what they were able to do. In less than 6 months, they were able to take their problem areas of rooms from 30% to 6%. EV was able to turn the beds over. They were able to take patients out of the ED much faster, which then gave them obviously more revenue, because what they call their left without being seen dropped from like 8% down to 2%. I mean, this was happy land all over the place in the sense that with this kind of a work project, the patients could come through the system a lot quicker. And what I've learned recently is this now is down to less than 1. And no manager had to do any of this work. Is that not wonderful? And so how do you sustain people? You take them from the first project, you bring them into a follow-up, you bring them right into the next project. Here's what I've learned in doing this work. And I got this actually from Thomas Edison. Got to go to the Innovation Museum in Akron, Ohio. You learn stuff all the time. You just keep your eyes open and pay attention. And so going to the Innovation Museum in Akron, Ohio, here's a Thomas Edison exhibit, and it talks about one of his fundamental beliefs was basically simple. If you could improve things by 10%, so his direction to his engineers was to give me a 10% change. Didn't need to be big, but here's what he went on to find. If you could get me 2 10%ers, meaning get me a change, by the time your brain got into the 3rd change, you made a 50% change. I've seen that happen with grassroots teams so many times where if I can get them to move, I get them to move off position. If I can get you to move off position by 1 degree, and you're a cruise ship sailing out in the ocean, where are you in 24 hours? A whole lot different place than where you thought you were going to port. So what are we trying to do in the work when we're working with organizations and cultures and working with yourselves? Get you to move 1 degree. One new thought you get out of today brings you to 100,000 new places you can go to. And if you're fortunate enough to grab 2 new thoughts and use them out of this workshop today, the sky's the limit. Where do you want to go? It's up to you. I think. And now we're down 2%. We're down to less than 1. And this is just their summary. It says, hey, working with interdisciplinaries, breaking down the silos, is something as simple as defining a role saved them a full FTE and 3 hospital-wide. This was a small place, maybe about 700 people, so 3 was a big number for them. Imagine what kind of teamwork could do on a global scale. Tony's process gave us mission to think big and solve problems as a team. It empowered us to change the work. What's been great about this is they had 7 people on the team. 3 of them have been promoted into managerial positions. So a lot of my clients are now doing is they're using this to develop their future leaders, because they're coming right in with the skills that Marshall and I teach, and they're coming in hitting the road running. So here's what I love about this work. You energize people at the front line, and then it's just skies are the limit. You build the level, the trusting thing we've been talking about all day. People, when their opinion wants to count. I don't care what age you are. In fact, millennials, their big problem is we want our voice to be heard. Does their opinion count for something? It improves the communication. So we're teaching people how to speak the boss's lingo, and we give them a megaphone. How to mobilize the diversity of different departments and skills. We saw that this morning in the circle exercise. Guys, you got to get out of the box and just not be robotic. Start thinking about what you're doing. Let's use the positive gig that we've talked about and what can we do as opposed to why we can't. And most important, give me a bunch of passionate employees that really care about what they're doing, and just get out. I tell managers, just get out of their way, because they're going to hurt you if you try to stop them. And so it's really, to me, it's just as rewarding as anything I get to work on. And I'm going to stop. There's our 7 brain principles. So let me wrap up our day. We've talked about trust and truth and what we're looking for, what our filters are in our gig. We're looking for new information and knowledge all the time. So we've talked to you about what that information and knowledge is throughout our day. We talked earlier about when we have blanks, what are people doing in filling in their communications in their items. Our brain is a success-driven mechanism, but what is the lifeline to success? Oh, come on, got to get this. We had 2 modules on this. What is the lifeline to success? Feedback. Feedback that has to have integrity and relevance to the yes. You want to mess yourself up, create yourself the yes team around you, and then figure out where you're going. So what you want to welcome around you are people that have integrity and share your passion for what you're trying to achieve, and feedback becomes the lifeline to how you get there. Give me straight shooters and we'll create miracles. Give me crooked arrows and somebody's going to get hurt. Marshall talked about what? Mirror neurons. Hey, the lemon test I thought was excellent. I love that lemon test. And I had to give her some tissue. She was crying in the back over there and stuff. The mirror neurons and what we copy and what we see, the language and the things that we do very often. I just read last weekend an article, Is Persistence a Learned Skill? It's the first science report that really has dived into it, and the answer they've come out with right now is clearly in our early studies, yes. And where does our drive for persistence come from? In the study, they did it with kids and their parents. And what they've discovered is parents who have learned how to overcome obstacles in their life create a skill in their children that says, when the going gets tough, you get up and keep going. When they did this group with parents who stopped and quit, when the going gets tough, you just quit like mom and dad did. So where do we learn these things? It's huge. There's so much that the science is coming out today and talking about the nurturing and the environment that we're growing up in. From the time we're kids to the time we get to middle school, to the time we get to high school, and then even as we get to college. And then we learned about 1 + 1, and that gave you an assignment at least to go home and look at your gig. And I'm not going to talk, we talked earlier about that, and that's just a summary of my experience. So that is our day-to-day. So how do you think I'm going to close up this day with you right now? Feedback! Some feedback. So quickly, huddle up, 3 things you got out of the day and any feedback that you have on it. So quickly, huddle up. I thought we'd get a big table. I got a table. Now I got a server come over. So, hey, tell me, you know what, before taking any orders, and again, I look to see if they're not busy or going crazy or whatever. Hey, what were a couple of good things that have happened during your shift? I've watched this. I will get that person to come over to my table at least 4 times more than any other table. At least 4 times. Now, I'm nuts like the finance guy. I measure this stuff. I change behavior in just little subtleties of that sort. And the same with the hotel. Before they give me a room, what were 3 good things that happened during your day today, during your shift? The 3 guest experiences that you've got. Would you like an upgrade? I think we have that. We have a suite for you tonight. Would you like that? Of course not. I don't want to. No. It's amazing what you can do, and it's not manipulating people. It's just getting people to where they want to be. Which, let me talk about good things instead of the news every night. And they're life-changing events. And if we can just get more people, you know, so I'm still on a mission. Boy, the mission's going to take me a long time yet. But I'm on a mission to get people to change the way they interact and what they do with their lives. And you too can create miracles. So I've got Michael Shine here with his team, with Andrew and company, working on my 3rd book, which is The Infinite Expandability of the Human Brain. And this is what this memory competition is, to show people there's a whole lot more you can do with this than you've ever thought possible. And I'm still on that mission, and I don't know how long it'll take me to get there, and I hope I live long enough to see some of it change, but that's what it's all about. We as people have a gift. You know, I want to see what people do. All right, we now have a gift. You get 15 minutes for a break. Get up. It's one.